Colonel, how are things looking for you? A lot of movements. They're finally meeting today as we speak. Um, but there's a lot of reasons to be concerned. The bombings in Lebanon are still happening. Netanyahu said he does not want to abide to a ceasefire, even though I have a feeling, I could be wrong, that he has to. But more importantly, there's just so many differences that we may have an end to this war in the next few days, weeks, maybe months. But there's a pretty high likelihood this happens again um, later this year or maybe even next year. What do you think?
Well, I mean, that's the big fear of the Iranian side. That's actually why they seem to be having such a defiant position, if it's certainly viewed from the Western side, because they said they don't want that to happen. They said that they want this to be it. They want some kind of security guarantees to even stop the war. So I don't know that they'll give in to that unless they get some kind of version of a guarantee. And I mean, they may not. They may just finally say, all right, we'll just take the best deal we can get just to get the harm to our people to stop and the damage to our infrastructure and all that. They may. But I think it's at least a 50% probability that they'll say, no, we're going to stick to our guns here. And even if we have to suffer a bunch of more months and a lot more damage, we're going to hold out until we get some kind of a deal that can give us some presumption that we won't have to go through with this, and some kind of guarantee, whether that's Russia, China, Pakistan, who knows, something like that. I don't know for sure what that might look like, but that's what they're holding to, because it is an existential fight for them. So I don't know that they'll agree to something that's going to get it back open.
Can they really afford it, Colonel? Like, me and you have always talked about how they strategically won the war, but what if the damage they've sustained is a lot more than many on the other side expect? Many is like, they're still launching missiles. They could sustain this for another 6 months. They could sustain a war of attrition. What if they cannot? What if behind the scenes they were about to break down? We still haven't seen Mujtaba Khamenei, and we're still worried. Some people said his face was disfigured. We don't know if he's even alive. I think he is, but we don't know for sure. Yeah. There's worries. I think Pakistani Air Force sent fighter jets to escort the plane that had the delegation, the Iranian delegation. They've done that before for other leaders like MBS, so it could be more for show. But there were 2 decoy planes as well. So even till now, the Iranian leadership are worried about potentially Israel sabotaging the negotiations again, which would be mental if that happens. But isn't there also a possibility that the regime behind the scenes, the Iranian government, the Iranian military, the IRGC, were on the verge of collapse?
Well, it's always possible. I mean, we don't know for sure. But I mean, even what we do know, that there's been profound amounts of harm to the Iranian way of life. I mean, their visible Navy has just, been obliterated. Their airframes that were visible anyway have been burned up. And a lot of their infrastructure, with their oil infrastructure, their electricity facilities in some cases, some of their other industry, aluminum, ammonium. I think I saw some factories that get hit. There's been profound amounts of damage. There's no question that it is really painful for the Iranian side. That's the intent. That's exactly what the United States and Israel are trying to do, is to create the pain so great that they have to give in to there. But this is why I think, or this factor here is why I think mitigates against them giving into that pressure here, because we have some experience with them for 8 years suffering profound amounts of damage and profound amounts of death. I mean, like 300,000-400,000, depending on who you want to listen to, during the Iran-Iraq war. So they have some history of being able to really suffer a lot and have a lot of things destroyed and still not give in. And you can look at the Palestinian people and Hamas and look what they've suffered for 2.5 years, and they still have not capitulated. So I don't think that the Iranian side in a matter of weeks is going to be, going weak and wobbly when these other folks have not, when they themselves didn't before, and the other people in the region haven't. So I just don't think that they're going to. I think that they can suffer a lot and still be able to maintain viability.
Colonel, you've obviously interviewed a lot of analysts and experts and military experts as well. I think you had Professor Mearsheimer on again recently. I think you did. But from everyone you speak to, how's the world going to look like post the ceasefire? Because I think this is the point of discussion that will probably become the main point that everyone's going to be discussing for the rest of the year. Professor Mearsheimer was talking about how this may lead Asian countries start seeking a nuclear weapon, South Korea, Japan. I didn't read about his explanation why, but I think if I had to understand where he's coming from, he'd probably be talking about the fear of depending on the US after what happened in Iran and what the US did, pulling out the THAAD batteries from South Korea, what the US is doing in Ukraine with NATO. threatening to pull out of NATO, threatening other allies, not taking allies into consideration when starting this war that led to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and that led to allied economies suffering. So allies may start to look at diversifying their dependence away from the US. We talked about the Gulf having to do with potentially moving closer to China. So I'd love to get your thoughts, Colonel, on how the world will look like. What are the the consequences of this war?
Yeah. This John Mearsheimer has said that on the show. Alistair Crook said a version of it yesterday. Dr. Robert Pape went even further than those and says that they think that Iran is going to emerge as a regional power broker at the end of this. So there's a lot of folks that are a lot of very distinguished people with credibility are saying those same kinds of things. And when I look at the landscape here, it's just hard for me to imagine how all the Gulf countries that have been severely damaged by this, about the 13 American bases that have been severely damaged to the point that we had to evacuate many of them, why are they going to go back to business as usual? However, let's just for the moment say that some magic happens in Islamabad and they're able to negotiate away something and the war comes to an end. Why, once all of the damage is being assessed and everybody gets a chance to breathe, or are they going to go, yeah, let's just go back to the way it was before and pretend everything's great? And because the whole reason they have had American bases there and have been subservient to us and had the dollar as the petrodollar, et cetera, was because of the belief in the strength of America, that it could protect them. And now that they've seen it was worthless because it didn't protect them at all, it couldn't even protect ourselves. So that's one of the issue. Why would anyone go back to that before? But the other one, maybe the more important one, is that we have turned Iran into a regional power broker, and we'll see. And all this depends on how the thing is eventually resolved. But by having them act on the threat to have closed the Strait of Hormuz, which has always been kind of a persistent concern, always in the background for decades, now it has become manifest. And even to this day, they still, despite President Trump's claim to the contrary, still control the flow of transport through that Gulf and everything that goes along with it. And now then, even if you have some kind of negotiation, let's say that you were right a second ago, and that the pressure and the pain has been so great that they're going to be willing to make some kind of negotiation, even without getting, as they said, heading into these talks today with the reparations and the declaration of the ceasefire with Lebanon. Let's say that even those, they say, all right, whatever, we'll still talk. And all right, here we go, it's back open. But now then, because they have a system in place and a demonstrated potential, everyone's always going to know that if things go sideways and if there's another attack against them, that's the first thing that's going to happen again. So that's going to change the dynamics a whole lot just on that fact by itself. But I think that there's at least a 50% probability that they will not agree to any kind of an end of war negotiation until they have some kind of toll booth set up going forward, because I don't see any military path to force Iran for the foreseeable future into capitulation to what Trump wants. I don't see it, short of a nuclear weapon, and even a nuclear weapon, I don't think would actually get it done. So I think that leaves the Iranians in a position to where, all right, we're going to have to suffer for another half year maybe, and then we're going to get de facto control and maybe even de jure control over the strait there. And that changes everything. And especially if they say, and now we're going to require these toll booths to be paid in yuan and not the dollar, and that's going to continue to erode the dollar, which causes all kinds of problems.
I think there's there's a few things, Colonel. So number one is one thing I've learned from talking to people behind the scenes is they've never been so, when you talk to people involved in negotiations, usually you get a sense of where the other side is sitting at. There is such a level of confusion right now. They came into these negotiations in such an unexpected way. They have no idea what the Iranians will demand and what the things are negotiable. Other than the nuclear program, I think the enrichment for nuclear weapons, that's the only thing that Iranians, we know they have on the table, they're happy to concede on, because they've already conceded on it before these negotiations. Now, some say, they could be right, is that even that point they won't budge on. But from what we've seen so far, that's something they already conceded on. The Strait of Hormuz, what I'm trying to get a sense of is whether they're going to control the Strait of Hormuz for a period of time. That will be my guess, just to get reparations for the war. And then later on, it goes back to freedom of navigation. Because I think a long-term or permanent toll booth there is just so unheard of. It's never happened. I don't remember the last time it happened. I think it was the Portuguese, generations and generations ago that did it in one of the straits. But otherwise, it's never happened before. So that's on that point. I think that's where they're going to meet halfway. whether Trump is going to get a piece of it or not, that's up in the air. They have to they have to give in on something in return. So the US has to lift sanctions in return to make up for Iran, allowing them to take a percentage of it, because the US has no way to militarily be able to control the Strait of Hormuz like Iran is, without facing significant casualties. But the surprising thing in these negotiations is that the uncertainty. The JD Vance and the rest of the delegation are coming in. They really don't know what Iran's position is and what Mushtaba's position is. Makes it very, very tricky for them. But I also, from what we've seen, I really think there is zero appetite on the American side. It will take a lot from the Iranians to push the Americans back into a war. It will take something, and I'm worried that the Iranians will come out of this very full of hubris, because they consider this a win. They're being treated like rock stars in Pakistan.
Right.
What worries me is that this time the things flip, and instead of the US having the hubris of being the world's biggest military and getting into this war, thinking they can destroy Iran's capabilities within a few days like they did in Venezuela and lead to regime change, even though historically it never worked, that same hubris now, the US might have been humbled, and it's a good thing to be humbled sometimes. It's always good to be balanced, not to be demotivated, but also not to be too overconfident. I'm worried that Iran, which I think was humbled before this war because they knew their limitations, that's why they wanted to avoid a conflict with the US and even Israel. I worry their position changes. I don't think it will, but maybe it does. And they come out of this saying, hey, we're the big dogs now. We're going to actually keep our nuclear program, or maybe accept concessions, but build it secretly. Continue controlling the Strait of Hormuz, having the toll booth there, because we're printing so much money even past the deadline. And I'm worried that hubris, it flips, and that hubris this time leads to a conflict. That's another worry that I think is not being discussed. I don't think it will happen, but I think is a well above 0% chance that this could happen on the Iranian side, because that was, in many people's eyes, they're being hailed as heroes. People obviously not in the West, not in the US.
There's no doubt about that.
People in the East.
As a matter of fact, I think when you look at the video that was out this morning of the reception of the American delegation and of the Iranian delegation, I mean, to my eyes, it was a stark difference. It was smiles and handshakes for JD Vance and C. Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and little sideways hugs, and then just almost like, big smiles and flowers and cameras and paparazzi everywhere. I've never seen that for the Iranian side.
It's crazy.
It was a pretty stark, I guess, image about how this is going to start. But just look at the negotiations themselves. Those, you say it'll be harder for President Trump to restart this. It shouldn't be restarted, but there's definitely a lot of headwinds for him to do that. Like last night on Fox News, you had both Jack Keane and Lindsey Graham both emphatically saying that's exactly what President Trump should do. President Trump had a Truth Social out this morning where he all but implied that if it doesn't work out the way he wants, they're going to go back. We're resetting, we're restocking, we're resting, we're ready to go back in, guns ablazing, all that kind of stuff. So he's saying he's going to do that. But listen, we're trying to get a negotiation here, and even Lindsey Graham was specifically saying, look, we want the negotiations for the nuclear program, for the long range missiles, and the proxies. All of those things were on the table on the 26th of February that were placed there by the Iranians, where they had near zero enrichment, and they would get rid of the processed material that they had and allow more. I mean, literally, it was a golden opportunity, better than what they had with the JCPOA, the U.S. side. And we threw that in the trash. Now, why, after all of this damage that's done to the Iranian side, would they come back with that same deal? I just can't. It would be foolish, in my estimate, for them to do so unless they got some really big gives that they didn't have on the table last time, because it was almost all submission. And so, to your point, I think the reason why they were hailed as rock stars and had that reception, because they have the confidence to knowing that they can suffer longer, because the U.S. side is in a much worse position, as is the Western economies, and so are a lot of the GCC countries, who were suffering a lot of loss of income because of the strait staying closed, et cetera. The ramifications with agriculture, with helium for the chip making in the Asia, et cetera. And then, of course, the diesel and the price of everything else. That is putting pressure on Trump from everywhere, not just from the Iranian side. And I think they know it. And my guess is that they're calculating that they can suffer longer with the military pressure from the U.S. than the U.S. can suffer from their retaliation and the pressure from the rest of the world. That's how I see it.
Agree. What do you think China's role is going to be in this war, post this war in the region? Because China's been, again, non-interventionist. But I think the Gulf countries want to diversify, as we said earlier, when Professor Mearsheimer, Alistair Crook, and others talked about it as well, is that countries around the world might diversify their dependence away from the US. I think it will happen as well. So what would China's role be in the region, and could that bring stability? And what would that happen? What would happen for Palestine? What would happen for Lebanon? Could we see? We've talked about it briefly, but I want to bring it up again. I made a post yesterday, and I said either these negotiations are going to demonstrate whether Lebanon is an indicator of the entire region, in my opinion, because like all the proxies have influence there. But whether we're going to see Lebanon become a free country finally after decades of countries having too much influence there, or whether it's going to be owned by Iran. I use the word owned, triggered a lot of people. But what I meant is that Hezbollah will continue getting armed by Iran. Iran will still treat it as a proxy, close ally, whatever you want to call it. And Iran will maintain their strategy of having a proxy network as a way of deterring aggression. Or the deal in Pakistan may actually lead to an entire shift in the region where Iran and Mushtaba may shift away from that proxy strategy, continue their ballistic missile program, but maybe he may conclude that, hey, the proxy strategy is actually is becoming more of a liability than an asset. We don't need the proxies. We have the golden goose of deterrence, and that is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and our incredible ballistic missile program underground that no one can destroy. So I'm hoping the latter, because that would bring more peace to the region, so we don't have that power struggle between Saudi, Iran, Israel, through proxies in Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, etc. So and even Iraq. That's a good thing. I really hope that happens, because that could lead to finally a period of prosperity and peace for the region, that move away from the proxy wars.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Mario, if people were willing to think rationally and logically, everything you just laid out there has merit. And that could happen if people were worried about what can we do to ensure our national interest. It's going to get us peace, prosperity, and the freedom from the constant worry about another war starting tomorrow. That is a valid path to get there. But we don't have people that are willing to think logically. And right now, the Americans may be on the back foot, but they are definitely not humbled. And in fact, if anything else, they're more angry that, like, wait, we cannot allow the impression of the last 5 decades, even longer than that, really since the end of World War II, of this near impervious capability we have to exert our will, and people will have to bow to it. We can't just let that go away by having a deal that we're kind of seen as an equal to the Iranian side, and both of our interests are taken care of. We had to give something to get something. No, we have to take stuff and tell them what they're going to do. That's how we've operated. And so there's a lot of headwinds against what you described from within the administration, from within the Western way of thinking as well. And you can't talk about anything here without talking about Israel, who does not want anything you just described to happen. They want Iran turned into Syria, into Libya. They want that just fractured everywhere, that stays, chaotic, but under their control. And I don't see that they're going to allow any of that. I don't think that they have been humbled yet either. And I think that both the United States and Israel are going to have to suffer a lot more pain, whether that's economic, diplomatic, or otherwise, before they're going to be willing to get to where you want. I'm for what you said, and I think that it's a workable situation if everybody was willing to do what makes sense and is rational. And I hadn't seen a lot of that in a while.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the news as well that's coming in. We're talking about China being a big winner. Just as we're speaking, news came out that two oil tankers linked to Chinese state companies crossed the Strait of Hormuz on today. The vessels, list what the vessels are. So while everyone's negotiating, talking about the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, China's just getting their oil out, no problems at all. So their strategy of just being kind of trying to be the country of stability in the world. Funny enough, they're taking that role away from the US that took it after World War II. They're using that same playbook. May shift afterwards when they have the power, as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. So the US has that power. The US has that responsibility. I think the US dropped the ball on foreign policy in many ways in the last couple of decades. Now China's slowly going to have that responsibility. We'll see how it looks like 10 years from now. Hopefully they won't drop the ball as well. But they're doing really well in the region. There's one thing that's interesting. Not sure if you had a chance to look at it. Iran said, let me get the piece out. I was just opening it as you were speaking. There it is here. Iran's biggest problem at the negotiating table may be one it created itself. The New York Times reports Iran can't fully reopen Strait of Hormuz, because it literally cannot find all the mines it planted. That's according to a report by the New York Times. The IRGC used small boats to mine the strait haphazardly in the early days of the war. Some mines were placed without recording exact locations. Others have drifted from where they were originally set. Arachi's reference to technical limitations, he was saying that in one of his tweets, I think, or in interviews, when announcing the strait would reopen, was diplomatic language for quote, "We mined our own waterway and can't undo it. Neither Iran nor the US have robust mine clearing capabilities." Have you looked into that much? Is there a possibility that there are mines floating around? Because they didn't, from the reports we had initially throughout the war, we knew that Iran mined. The reports that they mined, but only a handful of them, more of a warning shot. Remember, me and you, Doc, talked about, I think it's about 10 to 12. And the US immediately freaked out. Trump put out a post, started striking their boats. And I think Iran stopped there. But it was a warning by Iran that, hey, we could put more mines out there if you guys keep escalating. So do you think there could be a few mines floating around that could cause headaches to open the straits?
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that that's a risk, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least that Iran lost control or even visibility on some of those. But that is one thing that can be mitigated with an agreement, because then as long as ships know that they can come in, minesweepers knowing that they can come in, and now this is one place you can get some help from some of our NATO allies if they believe their ships can come in there and have freedom of navigation and not have to worry about getting shot, from the shoreline. Then they can come in and have a methodical capability to sweep the area for mines. We'll see how effective it's going to be, but we do have the capacity. If there's a deal, then I think the Iranians would welcome that kind of thing and not shoot anything down. But, that's on the backside of it.
Colonel, let's talk about Israel. How much influence do you think they really have? Because what happened in Lebanon was the whole backtracking by Trump and Vance and the entire U.S. administration and Caroline Leavitt. That surprised me. For them to agree on Lebanon, for Pakistan to come out and say, no, Lebanon was included, just because Netanyahu, and there was a report that came out that Netanyahu called Trump afterwards and said, hey, we can't include Lebanon. And then then Trump started backtracking. That was a real shock to me, for another country to be able to do this just for their own domestic interests. Do you think they will continue sabotaging the current ceasefire talks? Do you think they have the capability to sabotage it?
Well, there's no question that they do, and that unfortunately didn't surprise me in the least, because that's Netanyahu's, according to multiple reports, according to Joe Kent, who's come out and said that they were the primary drivers behind this. You just have to look at the interest of Israel, and not even Israel so much. I always specify it's not the Israelis as much as it is Benjamin Netanyahu, who has had this decades-long obsession with Iran, and he's always been looking for ways to draw the Americans in, and he never had it until his special relationship with Donald Trump. So once he had that, he's been able to do it now. And there's been so many times that he has sabotaged any move towards any kind of negotiated settlement, to include what was about 10 days or so ago when there was a former Iranian official that we were having negotiations with, and then all of a sudden he shows up assassinated. Him and his wife get blown up. And then now here, after we agree, after the Pakistani prime minister acknowledges, specifies Lebanon is part of it, the United States agreed to it, Iran agreed to Lebanon being part of the ceasefire, and then Netanyahu going crazy, and then not only saying, no, there's not going to be a ceasefire, then he's like an in-your-face President Trump, the biggest that he's had in history in a short period of time, where hundreds of people were killed and just one whole village was virtually wiped off the map, and they haven't stopped since. There was more overnight. So, it wasn't even just that. So I haven't seen any evidence that Israel, and I checked just before we came on here, the last I saw, that there has still been no statement that they're stopping anything in Lebanon. So yeah, it's a game of chicken, even between Trump and Netanyahu. Forget about Trump and the leader of Iran. It's Trump and Netanyahu. And so far, Netanyahu's winning those battles.
Non-stop attacks that came in just 10 minutes ago. Non-stop attacks on South Lebanon, despite the Iranian claim to ensure they won't meet the Americans before Lebanon ceasefire is implemented. Do you think there's a possibility that Iran again, I'm going to use the word again loosely because some people disagree that they did abandon Hezbollah before, but could Iran sacrifice Lebanon as part of a bigger deal? Say, look, we'll sacrifice Lebanon, you guys lift your sanctions. Could they sacrifice? When I say Lebanon, I mean Hezbollah. Yeah. It's a big thing, though. It just will be a dishonorable thing to do, and I think honor is important for them, and they have a lot of leverage. Hugely, yeah. I'd be surprised as well.
I think that the Iranians took a lot of heat for not coming to Hezbollah's side when the leader in last year or so, Hassan Nasrallah. Yeah, when he was assassinated and all those leaders assassinated, and the pager stuff, and Israel was going in and started clearing stuff, and Iran did nothing. I think that they took a lot of heat for that. And then now they had to have repaired something, because for Hezbollah then in this particular war to start helping with rocket fire, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, indicated that something had been healed. And then they were taking this risk of attacking Israel. Of course, Israel has just been crushing them as a result of having done that. So I don't think that Iran I don't think they can abandon them now without sacrificing any kind of credibility. Now it's not even just the saving face, but now then their credibility is on the line. And I think they have to do this.
We're struggling to disagree on things, Colonel. I like to disagree with my guests. Just it makes for a good back and forth, but we agree on so much. How do you think the ceasefire could break? That's a good question. What can go wrong? Because there's so many things that could go wrong. For example, the Strait of Hormuz is one of the biggest sticking points. Another one, I just said, Iranian hubris. Another one is Israel sabotaging it. What else? Could it also be all a smokescreen, as some people are saying? This is all, again, the US preparing to maybe prepare their ground invasion, maybe the goal of invading. Everyone was talking about the fact that a ground operation was pretty much imminent. Betting platforms made it imminent as well. So if a ground operation was imminent with the goal of controlling Iran's oil, and everyone said how Trump wants Iran's oil no matter what, it's been his plan since the beginning. There's that general whatever's 12-point plan, whatever it was called. The 12-point plan included Iran, and Iran has not gone through what the other countries have gone through, and the US would not give up until they do to Iran what they did to Iraq, what they did to Libya, which is a regime change, including more influence or control by the US. So maybe the whole thing's not over yet. Is that a possibility?
Well, it's not that they said Trump wants the oil. Trump said Trump wants the oil.
Trump,
Wesley said it like on numerous occasions. But
for decades.
I think that there's I would even go so far as to say a probability that the U.S. had agreed to a ceasefire here because we needed to reorient, reset. There's been lots of traffic of these big tankers, C-17s, C-5s have really been flowing in. And this was predicted even by Doug McGregor on our show before the war started. He says, we can go with the high intensity of fire for a period of time with all of this massive armada, as Trump always called it. But he said, there's a limit to how much ammunition and weapons you have forward stationed. And if you use it at a high rate, you're going to have to stop at some point and get it reloaded. You're going to have ships go back out because some kinds of portions of the weapons can't just be transloaded at sea. You have to go back to a port, and then other stuff has to be flown in. So I think that we used so much of it that we had to stop because we were running out of offensive missiles and interceptor missiles, and we physically have to get more in. And Trump has said as much in one of his Truth Socials a couple of days ago that, we're resting, we're getting ready, we're sending stuff over, but we're going to get ready to start shooting again if things go bad or something like that. So, I think that that's exactly the case. I'm sure the Iranian side said we could use a ceasefire. The Israeli side, we know anything to stop these missiles coming in, that whatever the actual percentages that are being intercepted, there's definitely a lot getting through. So we'll have to see how that works out. But if this doesn't open the strait, then all those pressures I described on President Trump from everywhere else, Asia, Africa, Europe, all those are going to increase. The price at home is going to continue to go up. That's going to be a problem. So I think President Trump is then going to be forced to either make a concession to Iran or he's going to have to restart this thing. So I think that the most likely person to restart it is probably Trump and not Israel and not Iran.
Can you go back to the point you were making? A lot of C-15s moving around. Is there indicators that the U.S. could be restocking? Could be. Obviously, we don't know.
That's likely. That's the case. Almost certainly that's the case.
Holy shit, can you explain that? Can you elaborate, please?
Once you stockpile all that stuff that we did in the months leading up to this, a lot of the reason why we had so many C-17s and C-5s and C-130s and all that was to build up stockpiles of the kind of weapon systems we would need to use. Well, you see how many we fired. 13,000, 14,000 targets have been attacked. You can imagine any kind of magazines are going to be dwindling. You're going to have to replace them. And so I think that this pause was necessary to do that.
I put a note to research that a bit further. That's a really interesting thing, because you remember we talk always about don't listen to what people are saying, politicians are saying. Look what the actions, what's happening on the ground. But imagine what that would do to the trust in American politicians and the American system and the American decision makers, which I know has already been eroded. But look how much more it will be eroded if all this is a smokescreen for another operation. That would be terrifying.
I don't think that there's anything to erode. What we did in 2025 and what we did at the start of this one, how can we have any credibility when you have the likes of Lindsey Graham and Jack Keane last night saying, we're looking for a negotiation on the reprocessed material, on the long range missiles, on their capabilities to have their proxies. It's like, dude, that was already on the table prior to the war here. It was there already. Why would anyone go back to do it now? And of course, you have the same guys with Witkoff and Kushner who violated that and then lied about how that's negotiations went. And they're the ones that are at the table again. I mean, I don't see any, to me, it's a mockery of diplomacy. And I don't see any rational thought that it's going to result in anything other than we're just talking again. I'll tell you, Mario, I know we're about running out of time.
This
meeting here was like I think it was May 2025 first meeting between Russia and Ukraine when they had face-to-face. Both sides went in, with maximalist positions. Nobody really expected anything to come from it. And to this day, it still hasn't. And I think that's how this is going to look in time.
I took so many notes you're speaking right now. And already, I'll put in a quick question. I'm going to have my team look into it. I said, is there movements of different airlifts, American airlifts right now since the ceasefire that could show that maybe the US is preparing for something more? Yes, reports show that's a quick grok answer. So it's like a lazy answer quickly, just for the audience. Yes, reports show increased US heavy airlift activity, mainly C-17s and C-5s with C-130s as well in the Middle East since the recent fragile ceasefire. Multiple sources document surges of dozens of C-17s and C-5s delivering cargo to bases in Israel, Qatar, Jordan, Saudi, and Kuwait, even in the days right after April's ceasefire. This fits a pattern of resupply and positioning amid ongoing regional tensions, blah, blah, blah. These movements are visible via open flight trackings. Please no. Colonel,
I would love to give you a different interpretation, but I can't find one.
That would be heartbreaking. I'm going to look into it a bit further, but I'm glad you've kind of brought that up as well, because a lot of people like me, I just get, maybe some people, maybe most people are like you, not optimistic. I don't know why I'm so optimistic, because I just don't believe Trump would get stuck in another war.
Mario, I can tell you, nobody wants this to be over more than I do, and I want this desperately to be over. You laid it out beautifully earlier in this conversation here about how this could result in something that brings more peace to the area. But I said at the time and repeat now, that requires somebody who's rational and willing to do things that make sense for everybody. And I just don't see the presence of that right now. So I just can't see that President Trump is going to allow himself to not win, or at least according to what he thinks here. And that's why I don't see any hope that this has any legitimacy other than to buy some time. And then he's going to, when they don't result in anything, if later this afternoon the Iranian side didn't give in on said, we're not going to open it until you pay us some reparations and have a ceasefire in Lebanon, therefore we haven't agreed to anything. And Vance comes in and says, we tried everything, it didn't work, we gave him every chance. And he said, all right, now then it's time to start hitting those energy systems and the water, all the stuff that Trump threatened about a week or so ago. That's what I think is the most likely outcome of this. I hope to be proven wrong.
Well, there's like 40,000 people listening to you on X, 6,000 on YouTube right now. Guys, let us know in the comments what you think of the Colonel, whether you agree with him that is very likely to go wrong, or whether you agree with me, but even though I'm starting to agree more with the Colonel based on what he said. But Colonel, always
I want you to be right. Let me just tell you that.
I think all of us want us to be right, but I've been wrong so many times. Like when the buildup was happening, Colonel, I don't know if me and you spoke about it, but I was one of the very few saying there's no way Trump's going to attack, because a war with Iran just made no sense on so many fronts. Every economist I speak to, it would be catastrophic with the closure of Strait of Hormuz. And everyone I spoke to, and you spoke to, I'm sure, everyone said it's one of the first things Iran would do is close the Strait of Hormuz. There's no way to reopen it. It's just impossible with drone warfare. And it still happened. So I was wrong there, and I'm worried to be wrong again. But hopefully I'm not. But Colonel, thank you for giving us your time, as always, and I'm sure I'll see you again soon. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
And for the audience, we're going to have Professor Gibbs coming on right now, any minute. David Gibbs, who's professor of history at the University of Arizona, very critical of the war. I'm sure a lot of you would probably know him by now. But it would be good to get his take on how the negotiations are going and what could happen next. There's another photo that just came in here. There is a C-130 cargo plane seen over Tehran, but that's an Iranian C-130 cargo plane. That's what it says, according to the report. So I'm not sure if Iran could be both sides preparing for another war. And Trump put out a post just a few minutes ago, said the fake news media is crazy or just plain corrupt. The US has completely destroyed Iran's military, including their entire Navy and Air Force and everything else. Their leadership is dead. The Strait of Hormuz will soon be open, and the empty ships are rushing to the US to load up. But if you listen to fake news, we're losing, President Trump. So I'm not sure if this is Trump telling his audience to win, to sell them the war again. But I think even if the war has ended, he'd still want to sell them a win. And Lebanon, something pretty extraordinary happened in Lebanon. Mr. Professor Gibbs will be coming on any minute, so I'll give you guys a quick overview of the news. Something extraordinary happened in Lebanon, and that's first, we're seeing a lot of protesters by Hezbollah supporters right now. They don't want Lebanon and Israel to negotiate. Now, I think that's a really positive development. I think, and I made a post about it just before starting my interview with the colonel. I said the only way forward for Lebanon is to find a way to normalize or improve. I'd go with normalized relations with Israel. I'm not saying Israel didn't do wrong by Lebanon, but Israel needs to pull out of Lebanese territory, and Lebanon needs to normalize with Israel. And Iran's proxy Hezbollah, Iran's ally Hezbollah, whatever you want to call it, they need to stop. They need to be part of the Lebanese military and stop opposing the government, because they're more powerful than the government. They're pretty much the ones that control Lebanon behind the scenes, and they have for many, many years, because they're very powerful. And that needs to stop as well. Now, Israel bombed the hell out of Hezbollah in Lebanon 2-3 days ago. And the way they've justified it, and I initially ignored it, is they said there was a coup being planned by Hezbollah in Lebanon. And now I dismissed those reports because I thought it was way too far-fetched, and it's them just trying to justify the bombing, which was a pretty horrific round of bombing, over 120 bombs or something in a 10-minute period. 500 people killed, I think it is, 1,000 or so. No, not 1,000, a few hundred injured, but I think it's about 500 deaths. Is a very, very ferocious round of bombing. Now, there's been more reports afterwards, and a lot of defense personnel that was around the Lebanese parliament, Lebanese governmental institutions, including snipers. That usually never happens because, snipers and army personnel around government buildings building out, they're not going to be there for Israel. Israel doesn't have troops in Beirut. So a lot of people took that as a potential proof that maybe a coup was being planned by Hezbollah. Now, that would be very concerning if that's the case, because then it shows that Iran's strategy of having a proxy in Lebanon as a way of deterrence or increased influence is going to continue, and that's going to continue being a sticking point for Israel, and that's going to continue leading to tension. And that could still be, there's many things that could trigger a war, and that's one of them. So if Hezbollah and Israel have get into it again in a few weeks or months, and Iran they feel a lot more obliged or obligated to support Hezbollah, then that could see a conflict between Israel and Iran that could could lead to the US getting involved. And if we have Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz, that gives more incentives for Trump to get involved. And what the colonel just said, that we are seeing a military buildup in the region. I'm trying to find more information on it now. I'll do it afterwards. We are seeing more military buildup in the region, and I worry that this could be the US preparing for the continuation of the war. And people I spoke to on the Iranian side, and I'm going to try to get more interviews there as well, but they're being very, they just don't want to be on camera yet. But people I spoke to on the Iranian side, they're saying that Iran, in their mind, the war has not ended. The same thing they said to me after the 12-day war. They're not complacent, they don't trust the US, and they think that there's a high likelihood the war is just on pause, and that pause is temporary, which again goes against what I thought. Let me see, the other guest is with us, the professor is with us. He'll be here. The team is setting him up. He'll be up in a few seconds. Now, the big question here is what happens in the Gulf, and that's something I'll ask the professor about. There's another post here by Trump as well, talking about the fake news media has lost total credibility. Not that they had any to begin with, because of their massive TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. They love saying that Iran is winning when, in fact, everyone knows that they are losing, and losing big. Their Navy's gone, their Air Force gone. Okay, he's repeated. I think this is the rest of the post that I read earlier. So it's the same thing, Trump calling this a win, which is expected. I don't think it indicates that Trump it has not ended the war. He'd want to paint it as a win because politically it's very important for him. It's one of the biggest, I think it will be one of the biggest political setbacks he's ever seen. You've seen the split he's had with Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, Candace, which has been happening for a while, but now it's just gone completely, and Fuentes, which has been happening for a long time as well. Fuentes, I think, even said he's going to vote Democrat now, but we're seeing a split within MAGA, and that could end up hurting Trump. So he's trying to paint the war as a win. Now, we are seeing still attacks by Hezbollah against Israel, and Israel bombing Hezbollah, but it's dropped significantly for people that are not keeping up. There's been a deal behind the scenes. I think it's public information that's been announced. There's a deal behind the scenes that, it is public, that Israel will reduce their attacks on Lebanon. They won't stop, but they'll reduce. Iran has not retaliated for the heavy bombing a couple of days ago, 2-3 days ago, even though they said they will. So that says a lot, potentially. Either negotiations are happening or Iran just does not want to see another conflict. That's a really important indicator. And then on the other side, though, Israel's reduced their attacks, but they're still ongoing. Now, I spoke to someone that's behind the scenes in those negotiations, and it's the same person that told me the ceasefire was reached an hour before it became public information, and that was more of an opinion. So it's nothing, no important scoop there. But they gave me an opinion. Yeah, the guest can come up, Lisa, whenever you're ready. A professor can come up, but he gave me an opinion that he thinks that Lebanon will not just end and go into peace, but Lebanon is more in a state of, it will go back to the same state it was before the war, where Hezbollah has to pull out of the south. Israel will keep striking Hezbollah because Hezbollah is not pulling out of the south, to the same ceasefire they had before. Professor Gibbs, pleasure to speak to you for the first time, sir. How are you?
Yes, thank you very much for having me on, Mario.
Professor, you're a professor of history, so you've seen history rhyme time and time again over years, decades, and centuries, really. How do you see these negotiations going on, and how would you compare them to the negotiations that were happening before between the US and Iran? Are you leaning more that this could be the end of it, or are we seeing potentially just another pause before they clash again?
I'll make a general point and a specific one. In general, I think US foreign policy, to some extent imitating Israeli foreign policy, does not really like to negotiate. It likes to rely on force. America, I think the logic of the US foreign policy establishment, for the most part, sees negotiations as for weak countries. Diplomacy is for the weak. The United States is a superpower, and we rely on force. And we take what we want through force. I think that has been the bipartisan policy up until now, with some exceptions. On the other hand, the US effectively has been defeated in Iran, is what has happened here. That's a very dramatic thing to say, but that is what the evidence suggests. I think the capitulation was much more by Trump and the United States than by Iran. I think Iran was in a commanding position, given its control of the Strait of Hormuz, given its apparent success with its missile attacks. And so basically, this is the United States that's giving in. There's a very distinctive character to the negotiations, which they're being directed overall by Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is somebody who tends to walk away from conflicts he can't win. And so my sense is he wants to walk away from this conflict as quickly as possible. There'll be lots of pressures for him to re-engage, from Netanyahu especially, and from Netanyahu's backers in his administration. But I think his inclination is to follow his self-interest to an even greater degree maybe than most presidents. And that self-interest suggests just walking away from this conflict. He has the opportunity to do that, and I think that's what he's doing. It's significant that J.D. Vance was appointed to lead the delegations, as he was always the figure most opposed to the war. And so I think it's more likely than not he will think of some way of wrapping up America's role in this conflict. I could be wrong, and Israel will do everything it can probably to stop that, but I think that's the most likely outcome here.
All right, I'm just thinking where to start. You talked about how the US lost strategically. We agree on this point. The counter argument being made is that Iran's army has been decimated. Iran's leadership has been decimated. If people spoke about a war between the US and Iran just a few years ago, a few years ago, before the 12-day war, everyone would have said that, that would be catastrophic, even more than it has been already. This war would have been catastrophic for the US and the region and American bases. Iran would have wiped out these American bases. The American bases have sustained significant damage, but Israel hasn't been wiped out, again, sustained significant damage. So I think there's like two comparisons to be made. One, what happened in this war relative to expectations after the 12-day war versus what happened in this war relative to expectations before October 7th, because back then I think the perception of Iran's capabilities was a lot more than it is now. It became after the 12-day war. So my question to you is, isn't there an argument to be made as well that while strategically they won with the Strait of Hormuz, the US may be able to open the Strait of Hormuz militarily? They might have chosen not to. There's a possibility they still may, and they're preparing for it, which I'll ask you about in a second. But isn't there also an argument to be made that Iran, as a military, has been proven to be capable, but a lot weaker than people thought just 3-4 years ago?
Well, it's been capable enough, I guess, is the point. They've relied on their missile capabilities, and their missiles have been formidable. They've continued to launch missiles at the United States installations in the Gulf sufficiently effectively that the aircraft carriers and naval forces, were situated at very long distance to prevent them from being attacked. What I'm seeing is that Iran's capabilities were formidable. I believe they were about as formidable as they were expected to be. I think what Trump and the Israelis were gambling on, and many people have said this, and it's of course true, they're gambling upon the idea of decapitation, assassinating the leadership. Israel evidently had a coherent plan to do that, which they did, and they imagined or fantasized that would be the end of it. That would be the end of the regime. I should add, this wasn't entirely an unreasonable gamble just because the Iranian regime, or I should say government, regime's a tendentious term, the Iranian government is unpopular. There's good evidence it's unpopular. I live in Tucson, Arizona, where there's a sizable Iranian expatriate community. I know many Iranians here. And they've let me know in no uncertain terms that the Islamic Republic is not popular, and it's become more unpopular over time, partly because of American sanctions, but all the same, it's become unpopular. And so there was always the possibility, and a reasonable possibility, that by decapitating the leadership, they could have caused basically a breakdown of order in Iran, and the end of the government. That hasn't happened. Obviously, it hasn't even come close to happening. I honestly thought that was less than probable, just because the uprisings, I believe in early January, which caused thousands of deaths, have largely killed off a lot of opponents of the regime and led to the imprisonment of others. So I thought the regime probably was in a stronger position, but there was always the possibility that it would collapse. That it did not collapse quickly, did not collapse at all, I think sealed the fate of this operation, because it all depended upon regime change. After that, the Iranians did have this formidable missile capability and the ability to protect the missiles. They were being backed to at least some degree by China and Russia. And I suspect, had there been any possibility of them running out of missiles or drones, Russia probably would have supplied them with missiles and drones because it's in their interest to do so. So I don't really see this as winnable militarily by the United States or Israel.
So why, but then, Professor, but why, like all the points you've made, so many experts have been making those points for months before the war started. And I started thinking, like, when the war started, I'm like, what am I missing? Is there some new military capabilities the US has we don't know about? People have spoken about the US preparing for years to open the Strait of Hormuz. And the reason I ask this question is that, is there something we don't know about? Because I want to ask you about the argument being made that all these negotiations are just a smokescreen and people are preparing for phase 2 of the war. I don't know if my team just posted. Like, is that a possibility? Because a regime change operation would be so beneficial for U.S. policy, for U.S. strategic interests around the world, controlling the Strait of Hormuz. But also, it's a process; it takes time. So maybe it's not a month-long campaign or a Venezuela-like campaign. It's a 3, 6, 12-month campaign, and maybe we're seeing now phase 1 of a multi-phase process.
Well, I could be wrong. I don't think Trump has patience for that kind of a campaign or discipline for that kind of campaign. He's profoundly undisciplined and really not that interested in policies, interested in quick victories and sound bites. And he really is never, people shouldn't underestimate Trump. He has a nose for politics, and he has an ability to sniff out before everyone else what the US public wants. And he's been very good at that. It's not an accident that he's dominated US politics for a decade now. What he's not good at is sustained, careful, disciplined implementation of policy at the foreign level or the domestic level. And what you're describing in terms of a long campaign, that requires discipline. And he just doesn't have any tolerance for that. And he doesn't have any tolerance for playing a game he's not likely to win. And all the indications are that he has lost this one. So what he'll likely do is what he's done in the past, is pivot to something else. Pivot to something else that would seem to have greater political gains for him. Short-term gains. He always likes the short term. He's very interested in the short term. So I think what you're describing is unlikely. Of course, it's never impossible. I'm sure Netanyahu would very much like to achieve a long war objective. But even that, I just don't see, it doesn't seem to me that even if Trump had the stomach or the patience for that, that would go very well, because the world economy is starting to spin out of control. Gas prices are escalating very, very fast. Food prices will be next. That's guaranteed. And after that, well, who knows? We could have financial crashes associated with this. The financial system has some vulnerabilities. I studied very carefully, by the way, through archives and things from my last book, the energy crisis of the mid-1970s, which has some similarity to this one. And my judgment is the world economy is probably more vulnerable now than it was.
Globalization.
And financial deregulation especially, I think, makes the possibility of a secondary financial crash a realistic possibility in a way it wasn't in the 70s when the financial system was highly regulated. So I think that basically I think the number one concern of his was that the economy was spinning out of control very fast with a lot of unknowns, including the unknowns of not just it's going to be bad, but how bad will it be? And that possibility, I think, very much unnerved Trump and caused him to decide to bail on this war.
You talked about Netanyahu. You've mentioned him twice. I said it earlier in my interview with Colonel Davis, and something I've spoken to Malcolm Nance. He's a regular on the show. He'll be coming on shortly as well. I've spoken a lot with him about this, and they're very concerned on what Netanyahu does, Professor. How much influence? I'm not in the camp that Netanyahu calls all the shots, but how much influence does he have on the way Trump and his administration walked back the whole Lebanon is included in the ceasefire term? Was just it's literally a demonstration in front of the world for the world to see of how Israel can influence American foreign policy, that the whole ceasefire was being threatened because Israel wanted to keep bombing Hezbollah. So how could Netanyahu sabotage the ceasefire?
Well, I mean, he's been bombing Lebanon repeatedly, I assume trying to provoke a reaction from Hezbollah, and therefore a reaction from Hezbollah's backer, which is Iran. And Iran had said they expect, and the Pakistani government had said they were under the impression that the ceasefire applied to Lebanon as well.
Yeah.
And so it would seem to me what Israel is deliberately trying to do is to cause a breakdown of the ceasefire through Lebanon. They have significant leverage there, since Lebanon is right across the border. They're really doing it very ruthlessly and with extraordinary callousness for human life. Just the killing of civilians and so on has been very disturbing, but that hasn't prevented the Israelis in the past, and I'm sure it's not going to prevent them now. So I think they are trying very hard to cause a breakdown of the ceasefire. But again, Trump, first and foremost, follows his own personal self-interest, and I think he will recognize it is not in his self-interest to take the bait here. Again, that might be wrong, but that's my call, is he will not take the bait. I do think that in terms of the larger issue of Israel's influence, the New York Times article was very clear that Netanyahu played a decisive role in the decision to go to war. They had a lot of details on that from apparently insiders who were in the room when the decision was made. You have the long-standing issue of the Israel lobby, as described in the Israel lobby by Stefan Walt of Harvard and John Mearsheimer of Chicago, which I think is largely accurate. But I think there's another issue here, which is this. Every president since 1945 has felt the need to be blooded, shall we say, and to have their own unique war. Every president, without exception, has had their own war. And, perhaps Trump felt it was time for him to have his own war as well. People see Trump as an aberration in American history of American foreign policy. His style and verbal style is very different. The substance isn't that different, as far as I can tell. He's certainly not the first president to launch an aggressive war. I doubt he'll be the last. And so I see him much more than most people, I think, as a normal U.S. president in launching this war, even though it's become a disaster.
What happens to American dominance in the world? So we've I was talking to Colonel earlier as well about how a lot of countries will start to shift away from a dependence on the US. How would that look like? How will the Middle East look like? What will change? We had THAAD batteries pull out of South Korea, obviously, out of South Korea. Professor Mearsheimer was talking about how Japan and South Korea would be moving away from the US and potentially seeking a nuclear weapon as a form of deterrence because they cannot rely on the US to protect them from potential Chinese aggression, or South Korea against North Korea. Japan against China. We have in Europe as well. We saw what Trump did, the Strait of, not only with Ukraine, but the Strait of Hormuz. The problems there was a big punch in the face for American allies in Europe and Asia. So, are we getting ahead of ourselves by expecting a massive shift in the structure of the reliance of different countries on world powers over the next few years?
Well, two things. I mean, number one, the United States just sustained a defeat in war. For a major power to be defeated in war is very damaging. One thinks of Vietnam. I'm old enough to remember the U.S. evacuation from Saigon in 1975. And that had very severe damage to American credibility because we were defeated, and defeated by a peasant army, no less, by a country and a people, really, the United States didn't even respect, but they defeated us. And that's something like that has happened here. And so that will have long-term reverberations in terms of how the United States is viewed by the rest of the world. There's another detail to this as well. The whole theory of being allied with the United States is to provide security. If you have American bases, nobody can touch you. Well, that theory has just been falsified. We've seen very clearly that the Gulf states had these bases, and it made them more vulnerable to attack. That's why the Iranians attacked them. And so I think other countries will, if they're smart, will recognize that having an alliance with the United States, having American bases in particular, will weaken your security, will open you to attack, will invite attack from others, will do nothing to defend you. So I think that's being learned. You know, I have the utmost respect for John Mearsheimer, who I listen to all the time, but I think he somewhat overstates the security threats to countries like Japan from China. Two things. Japan, first of all, is an archipelago and is virtually invulnerable because it's very hard to invade by sea. Okay, China has very little experience and not that much, well, not that much capability to invade by sea. Okay, that's the hardest kind of an invasion to do. And so I don't think there's anything to worry about in terms of security.
But aren't they expanding those capabilities now? We're seeing that in preparation for Taiwan. So we're talking about it now. But China in 5 years from now or 10 years from now, you got to think ahead, could be very different to the China today.
You're not really seeing the kind of massive military buildup one might expect. I mean, when it looks at what I think historically, the example everyone always gives every single time is the Germans in the 1930s, okay? The buildup leading to the invasion of Poland. Germany did a massive buildup in the 30s. I mean, it was massive. I'm not really seeing that in China, certainly not in Russia. You're not seeing, it does not have, as a percentage of GDP, the amount they're spending is much lower than the United States in China. And I mean, it's significant and it's increasing, but I'm not seeing the kind of massive buildup they would have to do for an invasion of Taiwan. I mean, they talk about very aggressively about, you know, incorporating Taiwan into China. I do wonder if that's true because you're not seeing the kind of buildup one would expect for that. China has no overseas bases, or they might have one in the Bab el-Mandeb region, nothing like the United States. You're not seeing the kind of massive expansion you'd expect if China's really aiming for world power in a military sense. So I think that's overstated, is my view.
Talking about military buildup, how will Iran look like? Do you think they have the ability? You talked about the US facing a defeat, a world power, a global military facing a defeat. Could we see Iran build up militarily? And what have they proven in this war that people didn't know before the war? And one of them is, for example, being able to sustain American bombardment and continue firing missiles, having their missile launchers underground, in potentially deep enough where it's unpenetrable for the bunker busters.
Well, a lot of it is the obsolescence of certain military strategies and certain whole categories of military equipment. One wonders about the value of old-fashioned manned fighter planes and aircraft carriers in an era when missiles can be manufactured relatively cheaply and with devastating effect. You know, Iran did not rely on its air force, which is decrepit. It didn't really rely on its navy, which was small and largely destroyed, or a significant part of it was destroyed. They relied on missiles and on drones, mines. And apparently they were very advanced and very effective. And the defenses against them, the widely touted anti-missile systems, the defensive systems, the THAADs, the Patriots, Israel's Iron Dome, seem to have been less effective than they were billed to be.
Yeah.
Theodore Postel of MIT has insisted against ballistic missiles. You know, interceptors are borderline ineffective. And they're effective maybe against drones, but not against ballistic missiles. And so, you know, Iran has figured out an ace in the hole militarily, and that ace in the hole was missiles and drones. And they've basically won the war with that. And of course, there's the geographic variable of they're in a position to control the Strait of Hormuz and have effectively done so.
So what's Iran's strategies? Not only keeping their missile launchers on the ground, but just the volume of missiles and drones would overwhelm air defense systems, which, again, I don't know why it should come as a surprise that everyone talked about this before the war. So maybe first, is that really the biggest surprise, their biggest advantage? And could that become their new deterrent? The new deterrent is their ballistic missile program and the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz, which means they don't really need a nuclear program. One could argue they never sought one. They just got close to it as a way to deter. They never really wanted a nuclear weapon. It's more of a last resort. But is there a fair argument to be made that their new, like Medvedev said, their nuclear weapon is called the Strait of Hormuz?
There's no doubt all that is true. My fear is that they'll develop nuclear weapons anyway. The counterpoint to this is North Korea. All right, North Korea did develop nuclear weapons and convincing delivery systems and the U.S. has not tried to overthrow them. Many countries in the world, not just Iran, but others, will look to North Korea and say North Korea did the right thing. Another counterpoint worth looking at is Libya. Muammar Gaddafi did have a nuclear research program, which he abandoned, about 20 years, more than 20 years ago, with a tacit understanding, at least, that the United States and its allies would not try to overthrow him. And then they overthrew him anyway and tortured him to death. He was publicly tortured to death. And I think a lot of people looked at that and said the big mistake Gaddafi made is to get rid of his nuclear program. He should have done what the North Koreans did. I'm not advocating this because I think nuclear weapons are extremely dangerous and they're very worrying to me. I'm just saying how it's going to be seen by many observers. And I fear the lesson they will learn once again is that Iran should have developed nuclear weapons earlier. I think a much better solution would have been if the United States and Israel would have left them alone, because with the main effect of this, the main effect, I think, would be a new round of nuclear proliferation, which will put the world in a more perilous state and a much greater danger to the human race. But I think that
would the US allow them to build a nuclear weapon?
I'm not sure the U.S. would be able to stop them at this point, and they can do it underground, probably. I've been listening to Theodore Postel, and he said they do have the capability to do it underground. America's ability to stop them, I think, has just expired. I mean, we tried to subdue them just recently in this last war. Look how that went. So I don't think Trump would want to have another go at it. So I do fear that it's more likely than not Iran will develop a nuclear weapon. Of course, the previous Ayatollah who was assassinated, Khamenei, had a fatwa against development of nuclear weapons. And of course, they had to assassinate him. And he was the principal blockage to developing nuclear weapons. And here we are. So I think, yes, nuclear weapons would be a probability at this point. And then other countries in the region may be incentivized to do so as well. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, maybe others. So I find this very worrying. And I think that if people were smart, they would try to collectively reinforce the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But that doesn't seem likely.
That's a very scary outcome, Professor, and a very valid point.
Yeah.
That this war could lead to a nuclear arms race in the region, because if Iran builds one, Saudi will definitely build one, and Turkey will definitely build one, and other Gulf countries would either want to consider building one or having a relationship and alliance with ones that have one, and we know Israel has one, and that's in the region, the most volatile region in the world.
It's more than that, because if that starts, then as you know, it basically in East Asia, other countries could develop nuclear weapons. If I'm not mistaken, there's been talk in Germany and Sweden of developing nuclear weapons. The problem is this: anytime you have a country with nuclear weapons, there's always a danger something will go wrong and they'll be used. And the more countries that have nuclear weapons, the greater that risk is. And so the overall risk over time is magnified with proliferation. We should all be extremely worried about that. People worry about fanciful possibilities like China invading Japan. Personally, I think that's a fanciful possibility. They should be much more worried about nuclear proliferation, accidental use of nuclear weapons. Use of nuclear weapons maybe by a rogue head of state, and that kind of thing. I think that's a much more likely, a much more plausible scenario for risk and danger that's not really very much talked about.
I think it will be very soon. I
hope so. I hope it's not too late, though, when people start finally talking about it.
With Israel, so Professor, would Israel allow them, though? We know Israel has a nuke, and some people were talking about this war causing Israel to use a tactical nuke. So Israel has that leverage of a tactical nuke. I just can't imagine them wanting, under any circumstances, Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Well, that's I'm worried they'll do whatever it takes. They'll bomb Iran, and if Iran starts to win that war, they might have a very, very small nuclear strike on Iranian territory as a warning shot.
Well, let me say, I think what Israel has been doing with regard to Iran has been for decades irrational, and that everything they've been doing has been pushing Iran towards developing nuclear weapons and making it more and more likely. And I think Israel would have been very much smarter to just leave Iran alone and not continually encourage them to develop nuclear weapons, which is exactly what the Israelis have been doing. Israel does have this nuclear capability. Everybody knows it. They've had it probably since '67. The Federation of American Scientists estimates between 90 and 400 nuclear warheads the Israelis have. And it's very possible that given the sort of paranoid mindset that the Israeli leadership has, especially under Netanyahu, they might very well see an undefeated Iran, and Iran likely to develop nuclear weapons, as an imminent existential threat to Israel. And maybe they would be tempted to use nuclear weapons against them unilaterally without American permission. And there's nothing that could really stop them, unfortunately. And so I think that's not a probability, but it certainly is. It's in the realm of possibility for sure.
That is, again, that's a very, very scary possibility. Is there a possibility as well that we see the opposite, that we see Israel denuclearize? I don't know if anyone in the US could get them to remove their nuclear weapons program. And hold on, have we had any country that had a nuclear weapon that decommissioned it, that got rid of it?
Yes, we do. South
Use
Africa,
as an example.
South Africa had active, to the best of my knowledge, deployable nuclear weapons at the time of the end of apartheid, which ended fully in 1994. And they did fully decommission all of their nuclear weapons and their nuclear research capabilities. So we do have that precedent, in fact. And other countries have had nuclear research capabilities, including Libya, that has been partially or fully decommissioned. Argentina, I think, did the same thing. So there are precedents for this. I think the United States does have leverage. The U.S. has a lot of leverage, and it's money. The U.S. has been subsidizing the Israeli economy and the Israeli military for over 50 years to a very substantial degree. And the U.S. could simply demand Israel denuclearize or have all that money pulled and permanently pulled from Israel. The U.S. could do that. Whether Israel would listen to them, I don't know, but it's a possibility. The U.S. would certainly have a lot of leverage economically over Israel. It's never used it, at least not recently. You could arguably, you could say it was used briefly in the 80s and early 90s, but not recently. And the question is, why not?
Oh, that's my next question. Why? What am I missing here, Professor? I know that Israel has a lot of influence over the US, but as a professor, obviously you look at things very objectively. How much influence? That whole walking back the Lebanon out of the PCO was a bit of a shock to me. I know they have influence, but it seems to be a lot more than I initially expected.
Well, there's no doubt the influence is very real and substantial, and it's been discussed many times. I think there's something else to it, though, which is this. Israel has been viewed as a model for the United States. The foreign policy establishment, the element of what's been called neoconservatism, emerged in the late 70s in response to America's defeat in Vietnam. It was an ideology and a network, heavily funded, I should add, by the military manufacturing companies, the military industrial complex. And they did feel the United States had experienced too much weakness leading up to and following the US defeat in Vietnam. And a counterpoint model which they advocated was Israel. The Israel Defense Forces don't defend, they attack. They don't apologize for using violence. They simply use violence as much as they feel necessary. They tend to de-emphasize negotiations, not completely, but to a significant degree, and take what they want through force. They see Israel, I think they have a somewhat exaggerated and idealized image of Israel's military prowess and competence, and tend to overlook Israel's many failures militarily. But nevertheless, they see the Israel Defense Forces as what the United States should try and model itself on to a significant extent. Neoconservatism gradually, more and more over time, and especially after the Cold War ended, came to dominate foreign policy discussion in both parties, and really has achieved overwhelming dominance. Trump initially had been skeptical of the neoconservatives, but now it seems he's very much taken up their viewpoint. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State.
Well, how is it happening? How does it work? I just, the whole Trump thing and this Iran war is just such a shock to me. And a lot of people that support Trump that vote, you saw what happened with Tucker, Candace, Megyn Kelly, Alex Jones.
This is a complicated. I think what you're asking, which is a very important question, is wasn't it the case that Trump was seen as being somewhat more anti-war than most of the political establishment? And many of the people who supported him on the assumption that he'd be less likely to go to war. America first, for many people, meant, let's stop doing power projection overseas and start investing money in the United States. For many people, I think it meant more butter and less guns, right? And in fact, you could look to his first term and say his first term, he did a lot of very violent, destructive things, including assassinating the Iranian general Soleimani and many others. But he did not start any new wars. And in that respect, he was the first president since 1945 who could say that, who did not have his own war. And that really was a remarkable thing. And now we have President Trump as fully a warlike president, a fully blooded president. And so what exactly happened between the first and second term? This would get into reading Trump's mind, which I can't fully do, obviously. But the best I can make out of it, I think, is that Trump, first of all, he began to see that he wanted to be a great president, not just a two-term president, but a great president like Abraham Lincoln or Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he couldn't find any one specific issue that he could with ease achieve some great success. And so he decided that the way to achieve this greatness status was to win a war. That's the ticket, is to win a war. I think that his need for presidential greatness is what caused him to do this. He obviously got very arrogant with regard to his supposed success in Venezuela, and that gave him a certain hubris. And then when Netanyahu, he really does respect strong men, men who project power and strength. And I guess Netanyahu sort of fit into that image for him, so he respected Netanyahu. Netanyahu, I suspect, not only was he prime minister, he has a background in special forces, but Trump appreciated that detail. And so I think that he was inclined to listen to Netanyahu more than he was to his own intelligence services. And when Netanyahu said, we have a foolproof, perfect plan for overthrowing the regime by decapitating its leadership, it appealed to his vanity that this was a simple, easy way to become a great war-winning president and go down for the ages, to go to be the equal of Abraham Lincoln. I think that is how we saw it. Obviously, it didn't work out very well for him. Didn't work out very well for anybody. But that I think was his mindset, and that was why he decided to move away from his earlier policy of no new wars. I think it's going to do enormous damage to him politically. It's going to destroy his political base over time. But that's going to be the price he'll pay for this failure.
Could he double down on Iran? I know we talked earlier whether that this is all a smokescreen and whether the war could continue, even though I think it's unlikely. I think it's a possibility that we should talk about. I thought the war itself was highly unlikely. But like we're looking now at the likelihood of the Democrats winning the Senate. What is it at? Wow, the highest it's ever been. The likelihood of the Democrats winning the Senate is higher now than it was before the war ended, before the ceasefire. I thought when the ceasefire happens, it flips again. So if we look at one of the betting platforms, the likelihood of the Democrats winning the Senate before the war. So the war started when? Was it, what are we? February 28th, I think we started. Right. So when the war started, the likelihood of the Democrats winning the Senate was at 40%. If you go back all the way to October last year, it was 27%. October last year. So it had been below 30% for pretty much all of last year. And then I don't know what happened in October, November. It went up to 35%. I can't remember what happened then. And then after the war happened, now the likelihood of Democrats winning the Senate is up to 54% versus 47%, the highest ever been since Trump took office. So if that's the case, could then Trump put aside, because he's not going to run for re-election, maybe he doesn't care as much for the midterms, so he could put all that aside and try to fix a wrong. One of the biggest mistakes that any businessman or leader does is, instead of accepting a loss, and doubling down and try to make it and turn it into a win. That's how you get stuck in a quagmire. You accept a loss and walk away. That takes courage. And I think that's what Trump has done. I think that's what he will do. And I would applaud him and give him flowers if that's what he's done, because it's very hard to do, especially with the neocons around him. However, could he actually double down? Could he see this as a loss if Iran stick to their guns and they want control of the Strait of Hormuz? They want to maintain their proxies. They want to build their ballistic missile program. Their only concession is their nuclear program, which was a concession before the war. Could that lead Trump to saying, nope, I'm going to go back into this and go all in?
I think one of the things that influenced Trump is that he came to realize he didn't have any good options militarily. He probably went over all the different scenarios of using, landing of Marines along the littoral areas of Straits of Hormuz, taking Kharg Island, types of special forces raids in different places and so on. And I think when the generals went through it with him, it became very clear that there was no really good solution. And anything he does is likely to result in large number of deaths of American soldiers, which would be extremely unpopular in this country, without any realistic prospects of success. The only thing you could do, I suppose, if you wanted to raise an army of several million and try and occupy all of Iran, perhaps, that which would probably take many years to do and result in enormous casualties.
Or you keep, with that invading, can't you just keep bombing them until you have a leader? I know, Professor Pape, who I've had on the show, talks a lot about how it's never worked in over 100 years. I'm sure you know that as well. But if he keeps bombing them, can't he achieve a Venezuela 2.0 eventually? Just takes 3, 4, 5 months instead?
The odds are against it, and the odds are much higher that in that time frame you'd have a major economic collapse worldwide.
Yeah, true.
Of a sort that basically would be, it'd be like Pandora's box. Once you start that kind of economic crisis, you can't, go back to what it was before. And I think that fact became very clear to Donald Trump as well. He looks at the stock market a lot, and I think he was very worried about that as an indicator of worse things to come. I'm not entirely sure I agree with Robert Pape. I mean, I like his scholarship, and I think he's a very clever man. But I've written a book on the U.S. bombing of Kosovo and of Serbia and Kosovo in 1999. My read actually is the bombing did produce a capitulation. That was the main factor. The United States, I have to say, one of the things is that the sort of, must be said, genocidal rhetoric Trump has been using about Iran is not unprecedented. That has been used before, and it was used in Kosovo. And specifically, people forget this. In 1999, during the bombing, when the bombing didn't look like it was being that effective, Thomas Friedman wrote in the New York Times an op-ed. You can still find it. It's called Stop the Music, which he basically said we're at war with the Serbian people, not just the Serbian government, but the Serbian people. And we need to basically have what he called a real air war. And he said, this is almost a direct quote. You want 1950? We can do 1950, meaning we can bomb you back to 1950. You want 1389? We can bomb you back to 1389 too. All right. And so that really is a call for kind of genocidal bombing, as far as I can tell.
1389 is what?
Well, that was a key battle in the history of Serbia in the Battle of the Field of the Blackbirds.
And who said that? Sorry,
that was Thomas Friedman in the New York Times. You want 1389? We can do 1389. I mean, we can bomb you back to 1389 if you don't capitulate. That's what he said.
And he's the one that said we're at war with the Serbian people.
Right. This is in the New York Times. Now, my sense is that this is a man who was a 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner, seen as like, a great prophet by the foreign policy establishment. He had very close ties to the Clinton White House. My guess is he was channeling what he was told. He was writing what he was told by the Clinton White House and Defense Department, all right, as a warning to Serbia of what could be coming, all right? That's my guess. I can't prove that. But that is what he wrote, all right? And so the kind of will destroy you utterly and totally and level your cities, that kind of rhetoric that Trump just used with Iran, okay, was also used with Serbia. And so I do want to emphasize, I think people somewhat overestimate how unique Trump is as a president. They like to present him as uniquely unstable, uniquely violent. I think they overstate it. I think we have a long history in the United States of using violence by presidents as a way of sort of establishing their power and greatness. And so I don't see Trump as so much an aberration as broadly consistent with historical patterns in U.S. history.
I'm taking so many notes. This is so interesting. I love that comparison. And you think that, okay, that's really interesting. And I'm one of the few that were not as critical as others of Trump's comments. People are like, no president should ever talk like this. Tucker Carlson's up in arms. The president should take away his nuclear codes.
I agree.
I agree as well, but I also wasn't as worried as some way. If anything, I saw it as a positive sign, because for me, it just looked like he's capitulating. He's just doing everything it takes to kind of have Iran to concede as much as possible. And one could argue it may have worked, because a lot of people are saying Iran has no incentive to end the war. I've had guests come on the show say Iran won't accept an end to the war. They have the upper hand, and they want to ensure there's deterrence. They want to keep this war going on for as long as possible. And it seems Iran accepted Trump's off-ramp as quickly as possible. Now, the points, what do you think Iran will concede on? And what do you think Iran will not concede on based on what you're seeing right now? And you've already said that this has been a strategic win for Iran. One could even say a military win, depending on what you compare it to. Obviously, it's not going to be a total win against the US, but a military win in maintaining their capability to fire missiles, drones, and keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. But what do you see? How do you see the negotiations turn out?
Well, the key element is going to be clearly, first of all, some kind of ironclad guarantee Israel and the United States will not attack them again, perhaps validated by the UN Security Council to give it the kind of firmness. There would also have to be an unfreezing of Iran's assets, basically, which have been frozen for a very long time in the United States, the lifting of sanctions. And I think that Iran probably would have some kind of maybe compromise, but a compromise tilted toward them in the Strait of Hormuz, that they will allow shipping from the Strait of Hormuz, but with some kind of a toll, tax, call it whatever you want, perhaps share with Oman, that would pay for reconstruction. I don't really see them pushing formal reparations from the United States, because that would be too humiliating for the United States. No American president under any circumstances would agree to reparations. But what they could do, and will probably do, is used basically taxes on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz,
Yeah.
enforced primarily by them, maybe with Oman, maybe with some degree of internationalization, but to pay for the reconstruction of their country, which seems like, you might say, a reasonable demand from their standpoint. And one can understand why they would do that. Overall, when you win a war, I do see this as primarily won by Iran. I mean, I'll grant they might have shown some degree of loss of nerve based upon the damage that was being done to Iran's infrastructure and cities. I mean, another factor not to be dismissed is possibly pressured by their allies, Russia, especially China. I think China is a country that really does want stability in the world. I think it prefers stability to instability. And they really did not like the prospect of an economic collapse with an unclear end and an unclear result. That kind of instability is the sort of thing China, I think, would be very afraid of. And so I think they would put pressure on Iran not to do that, not to continue it beyond a certain point.
While you're speaking, Professor, two pieces of information came. U.S. forces have begun clearing mines in the Strait of Hormuz, according to CENTCOM. So the reports that Iran was mining the straits are true. It wasn't many mines. And number two is negotiations between the U.S. and Iran are at a stalemate over the Strait of Hormuz. So the Strait of Hormuz could be the big sticking point. Will the U.S. accept a toll booth there?
They'll probably come up, again, this is just speculation. I don't have a crystal ball, but the best I can make out of it is the United States is going to have to accept some kind of toll booth. And they'll probably do it in a way that will, look like a concession to the United States. It'll call it something else. They'll think of some fig leaf. But the essence of it will be some degree of taxation of shipping through the Straits of Hormuz. I think Iran will insist upon that. I think they're in a position to insist on that and to demand it, really. So I think they will get some kind of a toll booth. What the formulation will take and how it'll be operationalized, I guess that will be complicated. But the essence of it will be some form of Iranian-led toll booth.
That is crazy. For how long?
That's a big question, because it could take years to reconstruct the country. And they could claim legitimately we could reconstruct it not only with regard to the war, but also the sanctions, which have gone on for decades. And so that would be subject to
this is a problem. This is a problem for the next administration. This is what people don't understand about American politics. When a president is dealing with certain issues, especially economic issues, it's not their actions that led to it. It's more likely the president before them or two administrations or three administrations before them. So decisions, every president, the decisions they take impact multiple administrations to come. And this is happening right now. And this is why there's a lot of people, including myself, love to we always criticize the unelected bureaucrats that are there, but they also play a role in maintaining a continuity and thinking long term, because each president thinks about their term, a 4 to 8 year term. There's people behind the scenes that are unelected that do have, that don't have a term limit, and they make decisions for multiple generations. They were the ones generations for multiple years and multiple administrations, and they're the ones, many would argue, that may have played a role. I was arguing may have played a role in this war in Iran. They might. So maybe it could be Trump because of the intel that he was given. But for told Trump, like, hey, if we win this war, we have control of the Strait of Hormuz. And then he start talking about the military-industrial complex, the lobbying group, the Israeli AIPAC, the Israeli pro-Israel lobbying group. But anyway, going back to it. So Iran having control of the Strait of Hormuz just gives them so much leverage in the world. Is it fair to say that Iran is now, maybe you could say has always been, but is now a superpower in the Middle East, just like Israel and Saudi?
Well, let me just back up a little bit. One of your points about the question of long-term planning is that looking at U.S. history over a longer period of time, when I look at, let's say, the 40s, you had a culture among the foreign policy establishment and the American elite that was very long-term. They really were planning for decades ahead. And in some ways, it was kind of impressive. I don't see anything like that happening now. The culture has changed completely to completely short-term perspective. At every level, in the private sector, in the government sector, the permanent bureaucracy. 2 years is a long time, and that's about it. The private sector with financialization, you're looking at maybe the next 3 months. And so I think that that's one of the problems you have here. I think there's no planning for the long term, no interest in the long term. But as far as the other question you asked as to whether or not Saudi Arabia will become a power, there's no doubt their power has been elevated. I mean, superpower, that's a league above them, you might say. They don't have the economic wherewithal to really be a global player in any certain serious way. Their economy is not yet advanced enough for that, or their population large enough for that. But certainly in terms of the Gulf, they'll be the dominant power for the time being, because they do at the moment control the Gulf, control access to the Gulf through the Straits of Hormuz, and that's going to have a long-term impact. I mean, what's happened here in this war will be with us for a long time.
Exactly, they've proved, and as Medvedev, I always like to quote him, the Strait of Hormuz is their nuclear weapon. But wouldn't they? Because the Strait of Hormuz, the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz gives them a lot of influence around the world, Professor, but also deters anyone from attacking them. Can't they use that new sense of safety and potentially a new normalization with the US? We could see the beginning of normalizations between the US and Iran. The policy over many years that was kind of pressured by Israel could finally be shifting right now, because that's how Trump needs to turn this into a win. And he doesn't need to do that militarily. He could do this politically by saying, I'm the one who destroyed their nuclear program, and I'm the one who improved relations. Now we do business with Iran. Maybe we take a percentage of the toll booth. That would be insane if we manage to achieve that. And we lifted their sanctions, but there's a new, better regime. So he could twist this into an incredible win. And it would be a win to normalize relations with Iran, because that would bring peace for the region, because then Israel will now be forced to normalize with Iran. And if Iran is welcome to the international financial system and no longer has threats like Israel and Saudi and the US, that is an Iran that has also proven control of the Strait of Hormuz. Right? Isn't that an Iran that is now well established to become a superpower for the next, for the generations after me and after you?
Well, for all the reasons you've noted, there's no doubt Iran has elevated its influence, its regional influence, not really its global influence, but certainly its regional influence, and that will be for the long term. In terms of Trump basically trying to salvage a win out of this, I much more likely see him trying to pivot to something else, because I think as he would see it, that's what he tends to do. He does that repeatedly. He's done it again and again. And so that I would think he's come up with some other issue, maybe to go domestic and start attacking wokeness in the United States. I don't know, transgenderism, something like that. He'd come up with some other distraction.
We got Cuba first. We got Cuba first, Professor.
Well, there's Cuba. I suppose one of the things, Cuba, I think, has been strengthened because America's been weakened. I think that countries like Russia will be much more inclined now to give aid to Cuba, because they're facing a weakened United States. Bottom line is this: nothing succeeds like success and nothing fails like failure. The US has just failed, all right? And that will affect its position all over the world, including, I think, in Cuba, because, if Iran can survive, maybe Cuba can too, would be the position. So I think this is likely to be beneficial to Cuba in the long term.
Yeah, I think Cuba doesn't have the Strait of Hormuz, so they don't have any deterrent. If Iran didn't have the Strait of Hormuz, one could argue, and if Iran didn't have the Strait of Hormuz and the ability to damage neighboring countries with their missiles and drones, those are the reasons they survived. Cuba has none of that. Cuba has nothing they could do anyway. So that's why it's a bit different, been weakened, unless there's some interference from Russia and China. But I think Russia doesn't have the appetite. Instead, they use that leverage, not for Cuba, they'll use that leverage for Ukraine. And China, they'll use that leverage for Taiwan. There's already talks about China playing a role in ending this war, and then they want to use that card with Trump, and then they go in the meeting with Xi Jinping to say, hey, look, we've helped you end the war with Iran. I need you to accept that Taiwan belongs to China and no longer, change U.S. policy towards Taiwan. So that could be what those two countries would ask for. Trump did put out a post while we're speaking. I am watching fertilizer prices closely during our fight for freedom in Iran. The U.S. will not accept price gouging from fertilizer monopoly. Okay, so I think that happened because of the fertilizer shortages, I'm assuming, from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Just going back to the negotiations, what could go wrong? We're talking about what could go right. You've studied a lot of wars in the past as a professor of history, and you've seen negotiations succeed, but also negotiations fail. What should we be on the lookout for that could lead to a failure or breakdown of these negotiations? My guesses would be obviously Netanyahu. That's an easy one. A second one would be Iranian hubris. So Iran could be very emboldened and maybe could be vengeful right now, and that could lead them to request too much, stand their ground too much, and think they could, that they deterred Trump being dragged into another war, or they can survive further bombing and accepting another war until they get all their concessions all the way, and they might request a lot. We saw the 10-point plan, the 10 points they apparently the US accepted initially. They're very maximalist. They included pretty much, they wanted everything: reparations, nuclear program, etc. Now it's more likely a starting point, but that hubris could work. That potential hubris could worries me a bit.
Well, I think the main issue is a political one, and the political one is, has the United States made a decision to disengage? And I think that has been made. I think that decision has been made, and once that decision is made, I suspect the details are more likely than not going to fall into place, and they'll be made to fall into place. Now, you're right. There are all sorts of risks, as you've noted, including not only Netanyahu, but possibly the Iranians, demanding more than they're capable of getting and acting on the basis of over expectation of their own capabilities, which is always possible, and I wouldn't put it past them. But I think more likely than not, the decision has already been made by the United States, by Trump personally. This is just not worth his time and effort, and it's not worth the political damage it's doing to his administration. So my guess is that's more important than any of the details that are worked out. That the U.S. Trump has simply decided to walk away from this.
I'm looking at the numbers, Professor. How did the U.S. How did it lose? Because I know how, like Strait of Hormuz, ballistic missile program, but I want to ask a question anyways because I'm not a military expert. The numbers are 13,000 plus targets were struck, 1,700 in the first 72 hours. 13,000 targets struck. Like how did they even find 13,000 targets? Number one.
I mean, Iran.
13,000 in Iran. Yes.
Okay, struck
by America and Israel. Yeah. Number two, 155 plus Iranian Navy vessels damaged or destroyed. 90% Iranian weapon factories struck. Neutralized 1,500 air defense targets, 450 plus ballistic missile storage sites, 800 plus drone facilities. I know Iran is big, but that's a lot of targets. What went wrong for the U.S.?
Well, I mean, in the first place, you have to realize that I assume the numbers you're getting are coming from the U.S. Defense
American
Department.
sources. Yeah, exactly.
They have every reason to overstate. Whether they actually hit all those targets or not is open to debate. I tend to like facts I can check. And if I can't check facts, I tend to be very skeptical of them. So I don't really know how many targets they've hit. I'm sure they've hit a lot of targets. They've hit basically everything that's above ground. They've hit and destroyed everything above ground. Easy to locate, of course, because you have satellite reconnaissance. It's not a problem locating it. It's not really that hard to destroy either. What they have not been able to destroy, at least substantially, is the underground fortifications. The missile storage, the drone storage, the missile launchers, the underground manufacturing facilities, all of these things, Iran is meticulously placed in circumstances that are rather difficult to target, evidently. And it's for that reason that Iran prevailed, that they adopted a strategy of underground fortification that saved them, basically, that saved them from this overwhelming firepower the U.S. and to some extent Israel has. So I think that's how I would see it. Bear in mind, in Vietnam, the United States like to say we won every battle. We did. How could we possibly lose a war? And the answer is they didn't really have a strategy that was war winning. It's not. They were fighting a different war from the way the Vietnamese were fighting it. It's the same thing here. We were fighting it from the standpoint, you destroy all these targets, you're done. They lose. They didn't seem to understand the Iranians were fighting a different kind of war because they were using underground fortifications. And apparently not enough attention was given to that fact. The United States definitely has always suffered from a certain overconfidence, which is quite natural given its enormous firepower, and that often is its downfall.
Agree. Well, Professor, I really enjoyed this conversation. We'd love to have you back on the show. It was very insightful. And we'll probably have another discussion once the negotiations are complete. So we see the new world order in the Middle East with a more audacious and more emboldened Iran. But it's been a pleasure to speak to you, Professor. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure too. Thank you, Mario. Bye.
Thank you, sir. We do have Professor Bitar joining now to talk about what's happening in Lebanon, what that could mean for the region, especially Netanyahu's policy. Kareem, how are you?
Hello, Mario. Nice to see you again.
What's happening, man, in Lebanon? There's just I'm split. I think, and Lebanon's very important because Lebanon will dictate what happens in the entire region. It's kind of an indicator, an early indicator of what's going to be happening in the region, because it's like a as I've said before,
canary in the coal mine.
Oh, that's a better way of articulating it. So there's kind of two scenarios. One of them is that we see a shift in Iran's strategy with proxies, a shift away from their proxy strategy, which means a shift away from Hezbollah being a military arm and more of a political arm, because there's a lot of pushback within Lebanon against Hezbollah being a political arm, and that pushback will probably sustain. That's number one, and that should be part of a bigger deal, and that's a pretty big shift by Iran, and that is possible because Iran has a good deterrent right now through the Strait of Hormuz and through their ballistic missile program. Number two is the opposite. Iran's more emboldened. They want to keep their proxies. They want to strengthen their proxies because now they have a deterrent that allows them to keep protecting their proxies, which also act as a deterrent. And therefore, we see Hezbollah that could remain a power in Lebanon, potentially the power in Lebanon. And I made a post about this earlier today. I said, the next few days in negotiations will dictate whether Lebanon will finally be a free country after all these decades, or whether Iran now owns, either still owns or now owns Lebanon. So essentially, Hezbollah still is a military arm that controls the country indirectly. So that's where I stand on the potential outcomes in Lebanon. What about you?
I think it doesn't have to be either or. We could see a mix of both options. Iran could try to play both strategies at various times. I do agree that the next few days are going to be fundamental, but I'm afraid it will take more than 2 or 3 days to have a clear picture. What is happening today on the ground in Lebanon is quite worrying. The events of April 8th, these massive bombings, over 300 civilians killed in less than a couple of minutes, it was a turning point. Unlike what happened in Gaza, where you had a massacre that took place with no foreign journalists whatsoever, in Beirut, you have dozens of Lebanese and foreign journalists who were able to document everything that happened. And people realized that an overwhelming majority of the victims were definitely not members of Hezbollah. The neighborhoods that were targeted were rather hostile and even extremely hostile to Hezbollah. So these Israeli attacks were meant, I think, to torpedo the ceasefire that was negotiated between President Trump and the Iranians. And they used extremely heavy-handed methods that will end up providing fodder to the narrative of Hezbollah. My theory is that Israel was kept out of the loop, was only informed 90 minutes before the expiration of the ultimatum that Iran and the United States had found some sort of preliminary deal, and they did not take it gladly. So Israel unleashed hell on Beirut, randomly attacking a series of targets. This carries a huge risk of civil strife in Lebanon, because Hezbollah never misses an opportunity to fall into these traps. Now they sent some of their supporters to demonstrate against the Lebanese prime minister. And it's quite ironic to see them calling him a Zionist, when you know that Nawaf Salam, the current prime minister, has been defending Palestinian rights 15 years before the birth of Hezbollah, that he was heading the International Court of Justice when Israel was accused of genocide. So he is definitely a Lebanese patriot, trying to put Lebanon's interest first.
Who's that? Who's that?
Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, who is currently the head of the Lebanese.
The professor, how much who do they really, these politicians, you know, how in Lebanon, everyone says the politicians don't really call the shots. Other countries do, and the politicians deliver on these orders, whether it's the US, Israel, Iran, Syria before many years ago, and even, to a lesser extent, Turkey and others. Qatar.
This is true for an overwhelming majority of Lebanese politicians. It's true that Nawaf Salam, the current prime minister, received some strong backing from France and Saudi Arabia, and to a lesser extent from the United States when he was appointed. However, I do not think he will take any decisions that would conflict with his own principles, with Lebanese interests. The same could not be said about Hezbollah. Hezbollah is paradoxically demonstrating against the prime minister because he has engaged into negotiations with Israel. At the same time, they support the Iranian direct negotiations with Israel. And the other reason we are in this mess today is because of this ambiguity. Initially, Lebanon was supposed to be part of this ceasefire. This was very clear in the tweet by Pakistani Prime Minister, who was the lead negotiator. He clearly said that an immediate ceasefire, including Lebanon. And we now know that apparently the United States was aware that he was going to tweet this, and the talking points were sort of exchanged. It's only a day later, after Netanyahu called Donald Trump, that Trump said, no, Lebanon is not part of this deal. So now we have negotiations underway in Islamabad, and the Iranians are trying to play the Lebanese card, as they often do, saying we will only make further concessions once Israel stops bombing Lebanon. And Israel is not ready to play this game at this stage.
Let me ask you quickly about the prime minister and the protest right now by Hezbollah. So for people listening, there's pretty big protests happening in Lebanon against the prime minister because there's something historic that could be happening, where there talks about Lebanon and Israel meeting. That would have been unheard of. I'm really happy to see that happen, but I'm also really worried because we've seen a wave of assassinations conducted by Hezbollah. They've stopped that over the many years for whatever reason. Could be because they've weakened, they've faced a lot of backlash, whatever it is. The powers to be decided to change strategy. But couldn't we go back to that wave? Who's going to stick up to the other Lebanese politicians? Who's there to support them? We don't have Syria's without Assad, but Syria's just completely defanged. They have little to no influence. Who's left? Saudi and Iran could improve relations between one another. And there's Israel. Israel doesn't really have any direct supporters and any proxies in Lebanon because that's a kind of a red line that no one crosses. So there's really no one to stand up against Hezbollah. And if I have a prime minister standing up to the group, can't they just assassinate him? If Iran comes out of this war very emboldened, that means Hezbollah will come out very emboldened.
They are already very emboldened, and they are issuing thinly veiled threats. Actually, they are not that thinly veiled. They are issuing direct threats to the president and the prime minister because they have accepted this negotiation process. And one should also mention that it's 2 months ago that the Lebanese government offered to enter into these negotiations. They set up a negotiating committee with respected figures, but Netanyahu did not want to join these negotiations, completely dismissed this Lebanese offer. It's only after Trump asked him to accept that he did. So what is going to happen is it's going to start in Washington, D.C. with some sort of discussion between the Lebanese ambassador to Washington, D.C. and the Israeli ambassador. And later on, you will have a wider delegation. But the real question is, can we negotiate under fire? Israel is still bombing Lebanon on a daily basis. And even if we reach some sort of agreement, can it be implemented? It's the first time since 1983 that the Lebanese and the Israelis have negotiated. In 1983, it ended in failure because the Syrian regime at the time did not allow this peace treaty to go through. And here we have to make a distinction between Egypt and Jordan that are basically authoritarian regimes. If the head of state decides to go into a peace deal with Israel, he can impose it on the entire population. Whereas Lebanon is a very diverse country, a small country. So even if you have groups representing 20 or 30% who are not satisfied, they can torpedo the entire process. So I'm quite skeptical that we can reach an Israeli-Lebanese peace deal in the short term for a series of reasons, because Israel is still occupying part of Lebanese lands and shows no intention of withdrawal. It has rendered South Lebanon completely uninhabitable by using white phosphorus, herbicides, all sorts of illegal material. And even if they reach a deal, Hezbollah and some of its allies might, as you said, as you alluded to, might start assassinating certain figures.
Most people don't know that. Most people don't know that there was a wave of assassination led by Hezbollah, including the prime minister back then, Rafiq Hariri, many years ago. Obviously, everyone points to it's Hezbollah. I think it's no need to debate that. It was Hezbollah. There was a power struggle back then. Now, some saying it was a false flag attack by Israel to cause the split. There's also talks about Israel, Professor. There's also talks about Israel wanting to cause divisiveness and civil strife in Lebanon. Like Lebanon is facing two issues right here: Hezbollah standing up to the government and normalization with Israel. Israel trying to cause civil strife in Lebanon. Lebanon is at a very, very, very dangerous fork in the road right now. Very dangerous. That could lead to prosperity or chaos, like the civil war we've seen. And that fork is a demonstration of where the entire region is at, as we're seeing a big power shift potentially from Israel to Iran. And that power shift will first show its repercussions inside Lebanon.
Well, Mario, yes, you are right. It's been 20 years, so it's worth mentioning these assassinations that took place. It all started in the fall of 2004 with an assassination attempt against Marwan Hamadeh, who's a close aide to Walid Jumblat, the Druze leader, and who was also very close to Rafiq Hariri. So it was a message being sent: don't get too close to
When
the
was
West.
that? When was that?
2004, in the fall
Oh,
of
okay, that was the beginning.
2004,
Okay, that was the
a
beginning of
few
the wave of
months.
assassinations.
Yes, it was a signal sent to Walid Jumblat and Rafiq Hariri. On February 14, 2005, Rafiq Hariri was assassinated. Initially, everyone thought that Syria had assassinated him, the Syrian regime. It later turned out that it was bigger than this, and the justice, tribunal, special tribunal for Lebanon, international justice, accused members of Hezbollah of being active in this assassination process. They were able to track down their communication. And later we have a series of assassination of leading journalists, intellectuals, Jabran Twaini, the editor of An-Nahar, Samir Kassir, a very prominent historian, Mohammed Shatah, who was a brilliant moderate diplomat.
Were they all by Hezbollah?
Well, the Syrian regime played a role, Hezbollah played a role, and for some of these assassinations, an army general was also killed. We still have certain doubts, but most of these assassinations can reasonably be attributed to Hezbollah, because very often in their own newspapers, they would basically mention it. When Lokman Slim, a leading publisher, was killed, the son of Hassan Nasrallah literally gloated on Twitter. He was happy that Lokman Slim had been assassinated.
Hassan Nasrallah has a son?
Hassan Nasrallah has a son who was very vocal on Twitter. And I'm not sure. I'm not a personal friend, but I guess he's still alive.
No, I mean,
another one of his sons. Another one of his sons died fighting Israel's occupation. So you see, it's quite complex. They have family members who died fighting Israeli occupation in the 1980s and 90s, and they have other children sometimes issuing death threats. So it's a very complex movement. It's a movement that was born.
Professor, are we seeing hints of this happening again? Are we seeing any threats of, you said already there's threats of assassinations. Has there been low-level assassinations or warning shots or any attempts or anything at all? Because I remember I interviewed also a Lebanese politician, Mr. Jmail, I can't remember his first name, and he had a lot of his family members assassinated. Yeah, and he had his brother, I think Pierre, assassinated not long ago. So it's been even he had family members assassinated by Hezbollah, and he's speaking out against Hezbollah. There's another gentleman, I can't remember. He's a very wealthy Lebanese person. He's very vocal against Hezbollah. I've been posting about him. He's been extremely vocal against Hezbollah. I can't remember the name. But my question to you is, are we seeing potential indications that this could, I think Fuad
Makhzoumi. Yes, you are referring to Fuad Makhzoumi.
Yeah, Makhzoumi. He's very vocal against Hezbollah. I've been praising him a lot. But are we seeing hints that the cycle could continue, or we're far from it?
Well, if you read the newspapers close to Hezbollah, if you follow the opinion leaders that revolve around this so-called resistance axis, you see veiled threats to overthrow the government, and they would be capable of targeting certain figures. As you said, Sami Jmail's brother was assassinated 20 years ago. Sami himself received death threats. So there is a climate of panic in Lebanon.
When I interviewed him, the amount of security he had, I interviewed him and another one, Jabran Basil, but the amount of security he had and the way he would kind of go around taking different roads and stuff. And there's areas in Lebanon he wouldn't even go to. And that's now after the wave of assassinations. It shows you the amount of fear they're living under even now.
Absolutely, but he's a very candid, very frank person. When he got married, he told his fiancée, there is a genuine risk that I will be assassinated. Many members of my family were assassinated, so he did not try to sugarcoat it. He lives under threat. But then again, most Lebanese politicians live under threat. So we mentioned these wave of assassinations that are attributed to Hezbollah, but as you also mentioned, Israel in Lebanese history history, often tried to sow civil strife, to plant the seeds of civil strife. Ronan Bergman, the Israeli journalist, published this important book, Rise and Kill First, documenting how Israel planted bombs, car bombs, a series of over 100 car bombs in the 1980s. These were false flags operations. And today, what I'm afraid is that the Israeli strategy might create sectarian tensions in Lebanon. Hezbollah is falling right into this trap when it's sending its thugs chanting sectarian slogans, saying that Shiites should take over. And we have to be extremely cautious and mature. Sami is one of those figures who remain calm, who remain cautious, who says that the new authorities have to embrace the Shiite community and not ostracize it. However, he is very firm against Hezbollah, just like the prime minister and most members of the government. But we have to keep in mind that Hezbollah is still represented in this government, and Israeli attacks end up strengthening its narrative. Hezbollah's popularity was at its nadir, at an all-time low after they retorted after the Khamenei assassination. Now they are regaining part of their popular support because Israel is randomly killing civilians.
Yeah. Israel did such a stupid mistake, that bombing a few days ago. Such a stupid mistake.
I'm not sure it was a mistake. I think it was deliberate, Mario. I think it was a deliberate attempt to send a signal to the United States that we should have been involved in these negotiations and to try to
What
push
fucking assholes. What a fucking low way of doing it. What a stupid low move, Professor. That is so upsetting. 300 people are warning to Trump. Just call him and warn him and curse at him instead of killing 400 people.
Well,
Politics.
it fits a pattern. There is a long history going back to 1948. Israel started attacking Lebanon in 1948, and the attacks never stopped, even before the PLO set up camps in Lebanon, even before Hezbollah was born. Lebanon witnessed a series of invasions. In 1978, it was before the Iranian Revolution even, and Hezbollah was not born. Israel decided to launch this so-called Operation Litani, and many Lebanese think that Israel still has a policy that consists of trying to annex certain segments of South Lebanon. It will not be a walk in the park. They will face a staunch resistance. They were unable to sustain their occupation in the 1980s and 1990s. But today, unfortunately, the United States is not raising its voice. You know, it all started when Joe Biden remained completely silent when there were massacres, daily massacres in Gaza for over 2 years. I can only contrast this with the attitude of Ronald Reagan in 1982. Ronald Reagan, when he saw the images of a young Lebanese girl who had been killed, he called Menachem Begin and he told him, Mr. Prime Minister, the images that I'm seeing coming from Beirut remind me of the Holocaust. This has to stop immediately. And Begin had no other choice than obey Ronald Reagan, even if temporarily.
Why doesn't that happen now? Why doesn't that happen now? Why?
Well, under Joe Biden, he was completely nowhere to be seen. Neither Joe Biden nor Tony Blinken, who should have known better, used the leverage that the United States has to force Israel to change its antics. And today, I'm afraid that President Trump succumbed to pressure, even though Marco Rubio was skeptical. J.D. Vance was very hostile to this war with Iran. The CIA director said it was bullshit. He said it was farcical to think that the Iranian regime would fall and could be replaced by some Israeli puppet. And yet, Donald Trump decided to join forces with Netanyahu. So Bibi Netanyahu is still trying to pull the strings, and the time has come for the United States to say that regional stability should take priority, that US interests are not necessarily aligned with Israeli interests, and the time has come to insulate Lebanon because there is a genuine risk of seeing this country descending into chaos and fragmentation.
Yeah, that's really what worries me. I've got Malcolm Nass coming on in a few minutes as well, and he's great. You should listen to him. He's been in Lebanon. He spent time in Lebanon during the civil war. He knows the whole different factions, the ethnic factions as well, and he's really worried at what could happen next. I'm worried as well. If I had to ask you very quickly, Professor, final question: what's more likely, objective as possible. What's most likely to happen next based on what we're seeing right now in Lebanon? Objectively, not what we want to happen. Do you think it's more likely Hezbollah will merge into the government? Will it more likely will be emboldened and remain as is? Will we go back to the status quo? I'm worried. I'm like 50-50. Either we're going to go back to the status quo before this war, the ceasefire between them and Israel, either that, or we're going to have an incredible shift in the not only Hezbollah, but Iran's foreign policy and the whole proxy network.
Well, to be honest with you, Mario, I'm very pessimistic because, as you said, many Lebanese tend to succumb to wishful thinking. So those who are very hostile to Hezbollah for legitimate reasons think that Netanyahu is going to liberate them from Hezbollah and that they will live happily ever after. And those who support Hezbollah also live in wishful thinking and think that Hezbollah and Iran can protect them from a new Israeli invasion. I personally think that Israel will continue hitting Lebanon quite hard, that the Lebanese government, even though it is very well intentioned, does not have the means to impose its authority on its entire territory. The Lebanese army needs support and is not getting enough support from the United States and from the international community. So there is a risk of seeing a long process of destruction and chaos. This is why I think the real friends of Lebanon should raise their voice. The Lebanese diaspora, I'm happy to see support.
The attacks planned by Andahya after the evacuation order were suspended due to political consideration, according to Channel 12.
Indeed, and one of these political considerations is that Hezbollah's allies, the Speaker of Parliament, Nabih Berri, is trying to calm them down. There was a rift between Hezbollah and Nabih Berri after the Khamenei response attacks because he was also not informed only 30 minutes before. So Hezbollah was losing all its allies in the Christian community, in the Shiite community. There were discordant voices, no more Sunni support. But now, if Israel continues using these heavy-handed criminal terrorist methods against Lebanon, Hezbollah paradoxically could end up stronger, just like Iran ended up emboldened by this war, and it's still in control as we speak of the Strait of Hormuz, and it's still selling its oil at exorbitant prices, and a more radical generation has succeeded the previous generation.
This is probably one of the best indicators of the war, what we just have now, the cancellation of the evacuation order. Professor Bitar, always a pleasure to have you. Malcolm Nance come on now for the audience. Thank you so much, my friend. Always good to see you. But this is a really good development. The best indication. How are you, Malcolm?
Good afternoon. What's going on? What am I missing?
No, just now. This is probably the first indicator. I'm just telling my team now, the first indicator, the negotiations are going well. Let me just explain to you. It just happened to you now. Now you might disagree with me, but there was a massive evacuation order from multiple residential areas in the southern suburbs in Dahi. One of the biggest ever. That was 2 days ago. Yeah. And just now, Channel 12 is reporting it's the planned strikes on that region have been cancelled. Consideration for the negotiations. I'm not sure if they've been delayed or cancelled, but at least they're on hold right now. The word are suspended. That's what they said. Oh wow! Pakistan state media also just said the US and Indian Iranians are having direct talks face to face.
Wow! Sure. Good. Walk across the hall.
So Malcolm, I'm gonna give you the mic. Just gonna give us. We haven't spoken for a day. It's a long time considering what's happening. So give the audience your overview of how things are moving forward relative to what you expected and what you expect to happen next.
Okay. Well, there are many, many different components, of course, to that. The most important thing that we have now is that one, actual fighting has stopped everywhere except for Lebanon, right? So let's start from the top. The Iranians are adhering to the terms of the ceasefire. No more ballistic missiles are being launched. As you know, right after the ceasefire ended, that Iranian, how can I put it? Their decentralized command and control structure is called the Mosaic Command Network. They have 31 independent commands in the IRGC. And we saw how independent they were once the ceasefire announcement was made in public. But a ceasefire announcement made in public is not orders from, the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei or anyone else who is surviving within the IRGC. So we saw what we call these sort of like leaker attacks, right? There were still a few ballistic missile attacks on Saudi Arabia, on Qatar, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates. Within hours of the announced ceasefire and the announcement that the Iranian government had actually accepted the terms of the ceasefire, which they say were premised on the 15-point American plan and the 10-point Iranian plan that were put out there, we saw those attacks quickly taper off. Even though the next day we saw a little provocative action, the United Arab Emirates is assessed to have attacked 2 islands in the Persian Gulf, Siri Island oil pumping facility and Lebanon Island's oil pumping facility. So that attack quickly dried off, dropped out of the news, and we are now at a point where there is no fighting. What's not happening, Mario, is the Strait of Hormuz is not open. It is not. Let's just be honest here. The Iranians have allowed 2 tankers per day to go through the Strait of Hormuz. They announced that they were not going to be reopening it based on what was supposed to happen with regards to the ceasefire talks. But 2 Chinese ships went through today, and they went through what we call the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Easy Pass, right? The toll booth going up Qashem Island, between Levan, Qashem, Hormuz Island, and then out through Iranian waters. Now, what is surprising is that there's a report today that the AIS system, which is the automatic information system that every oil tanker, every ship in the world has, popped up with the AIS of the USS Michael Mansour, which is an Aegis-class guided missile destroyer. And we're receiving reports that 2 American guided missile destroyers may have run the gauntlet through this original, Southern traffic separation scheme and made it into the Persian Gulf. I'm also hearing conflicting news that they went in. The IRGC gave verbal warnings, which the United States Navy has never heeded those warnings ever, and may have turned around. What we don't know is, where was the Michael Mansour during this war? Was it in the Persian Gulf itself, right? Carrying out missile defense off Bahrain or something? Because the U.S. Navy did not announce where any of its ships were that were in or outside of the Strait of Hormuz. So that's encouraging news, but everything really hinges on this negotiation, including the fate of Lebanon. And I'm hoping that this report that the Dahia neighborhood of Beirut, which, let me tell you, that's like 600,000 people, the Israelis ordered it evacuated, which is crazy. You just can't say, get out of a major, a section of a major city, right? It's like saying, I want you to evacuate the Bronx, And so that has been called off. So hopefully cooler heads are starting to prevail. Hopefully Netanyahu is being brought to heel by Trump so that he doesn't screw up these negotiations that J.D. Vance is having there. And if they're actually face-to-face in the room, that's another great thing. Because they were in 2 separate rooms. Yeah, they were in 2 separate rooms, right? And it was like a real estate negotiation where you write out your terms on a note, a lawyer takes it across the hallway, interprets it in nice language for you, and then hands it to the other team. So if they're in the same room, that's a win. But it's also, let me real quick, I know I've been talking long. It's a win for the Iranians.
This is the photo of them initially negotiating. That was them doing it not face to face. That was the Pakistanis watching them.
With the Pakistanis as the middleman.
Yeah, and that changed now to them doing it face to face.
I think that's great, but as awesome as this all sounds, and I know Donald Trump is all about the optics, right? As less about the content. This is a huge win for Iran. And it's, it's less of a win for the United States, but J.D. Vance is the vice president of the United States. And he could be one heroic hamburger away from becoming the president of the United States. And, and that means that they are now on par with a global superpower in terms of negotiating power.
When was the last time they met directly?
I don't think we've ever met directly. I think they've always been negotiators like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. I don't even know if the Omani talks were face to face. I'm certain they had to have been at the deputy and at the ministerial level, but you're talking the vice president of the United States and the Secretary of State, the top three the second and third highest ranking administration official in America. This is way above Iran's pay grade, especially since we're technically at the hostile nation status. That's what they have. They're an enemy of the United States. So maybe Trump is just viewing this as another real estate deal, and he's giving them the Kim Jong-un treatment, that if you give them all the prestige that they want, you'll come around to his thinking.
Jesus Christ. There's an article that came out of the Washington Post just now. So the Washington Post, Iran thinks it has leverage. Here's how Trump can prove it wrong. Destroy Iran's missile, drone, and defense industrial capabilities. Take Kharg Island and destroy Iran's oil infrastructure. Killing any Iranian who enters enriched uranium zones. Kill Iranian officials who had been spared for the purpose of negotiations. Kill Iranians who rebuild nuclear missile drone capabilities.
Wait, I'm going to tell you who wrote this. I'm going to tell you who wrote this article. Mark Thiessen.
You read it already?
No, I know Mark Thiessen. I was supposed to waterboard his happy ass at one point.
That was him. That was him.
Of course it is. He is the most radical person at the Washington Post. He is the most extremist of the right-wing writers on the opinion column. And everything he wrote there is stupid. I'm going to say that as an intelligence professional. That's my professional assessment. He's a moron. Because if we could have done any of those things, they would already be completed. But he sees this as some sort of, this is the difference between, I get into it often, when people say, well, you were, this rank in the military. I am a street level practitioner of intelligence and intelligence collection. That means I get it raw, right? I'm OG. These guys this guy is a political writer, and he's like, just destroy all their ballistic missile capability. Really? Why don't you explain how that hasn't been done in the last 44 days? Explain to me how you haven't killed every person in the Shia imamate that could become the supreme leader. These people are so vastly ignorant. It is staggering how dumb they are.
Kill Iranian officials who have been spared for the purpose of negotiations. Like what?
You know what? I've said this to you before, and I'm a little hoarse because I gave a speech yesterday, and I've been on air for nonstop for 44 days, like you have. God, if there were if I had the Thanos right to eliminate one movie from the memories of everybody that has created more mayhem and bullshit, it is the movie 300. These guys all think they're King Leonidas with the representatives of Persia.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to read out the
representatives of Persia, and that they're going to kick him into a endless abyss, right? And with "This is Sparta." What are you, nuts? It's madness how these guys think, man.
Destroy Iran's missile, drone, and defense industrial capabilities. Isn't that what we've tried to do for the last month?
Oh, I'm not getting your audio.
It's all right. It just cut out now. It cut out for you. While you're fixing it, maybe you got a call. So essentially, them saying to destroy Iran's missile, drone, and defense industrial capabilities. Let me know when you can hear me so I know.
I'm not hearing you.
Me? That's right. We'll get Lisa, if you could take him off stage, fix his audio, and just bring him back up, that'll be perfect. So the producer's going to bring it up for you, Malcolm, and then we'll have you back. But just the first point in that Washington Post article, you guys should read it. It's just fucking horrendous. Destroy Iran's missile, drone, and defense industrial capabilities, which is exactly what we tried for the last month. It's exactly the reason that we are in these negotiations. Another thing, while fixing Malcolm Nassar's audio, there was an attack, and it's very, very significant, an attack that indicates the negotiations are going well. That was being planned on Dahi. There was a massive evacuation order that was given in Dahi. Let me show you guys how significant it is. This is it here. That's how huge it is. Now, if you guys follow up these maps that come out, negotiate the evacuation orders from the Israeli side, that will be probably the biggest I've ever seen. And people saw, they see this, that's right below the airport. Now, I've landed in this airport, went out to Lebanon to negotiate with some of the people landing there. That's the evacuation order that was given. But Malcolm, the point I was just telling the audience is the first point in that Washington Post article, when they say destroy their missile and ballistic missile program, the nuclear, so destroy Iran's missile, drone, and defense industrial capabilities. That was his recommendation. What I'm really confused is, isn't this exactly what we've tried for the last month? That's the main reason we're in these negotiations, because that failed?
Yeah. 44 days of look, Mario, I'm going to tell you guys something. The only thing we have not thrown at Iran in this war is a nuclear weapon. Every weapon system America owns, advanced weapon systems. You know, the JSSM missile, we fired too much of it, right? Too much of it. We have nothing to defend if China attacks, or we have to go into a major war with another peer adversary. And this guy's going, let's bomb them. Bomb them with what, dumbass? I mean, what's left to bomb with? You can fly B-1, B-2, B-21 Raider, F-15E strikes day and night for the next 6 months, and you will not be able to get that capacity. That's why when we thought about what are they going to do with all those paratroopers, the one place that's a real bugaboo for them is the Yazid Mountain ballistic missile launch facility that they can't seem to kill, right? Because it's literally inside 500 meters under a mountain, and it's a network of giant tunnels, and they can't get it. And this is why you have politicians, big heads, idiot opinion writers like Mark Thiessen, all right, who want to show their manliness. By the way, same Mark Thiessen that asked me to waterboard him, and when I agreed to do it, he backed out of it because I said, I'm going to make you confess that you're a liberal. All right? I mean, because he's that kind of big mouth that can't shut his mouth up, that comes from a position of ignorance. All right? I have fought the Iranians. They have almost killed me. I have helped kill them. Right? And so I don't take this as a joke. I don't take it lightly. You can't just come out and say, well, why don't we kill these 14 people are in that negotiating room. You think you're going to make them fear you over Allah? Then you don't understand Islam or Shia Islam.
There's a lot of people talking about movements of various aircraft, American aircraft, C-15, C-5, C-130s, etc. Does that indicate that maybe the US is preparing either? So I look at it as a pressure tactic for the Iranians to say, hey, we are ready to continue this if you guys don't accept the deal. But others are saying that, no, this could all be a smokescreen. Is that a possibility, even if it's unlikely, that this is all a smokescreen and Trump has in his mind to capture the Strait of Hormuz? He's already made up his mind after decades of wanting Iran's oil. And what we're seeing right now is all, again, another bluff?
Mario, I just want to point this out to you, okay? Again, I'm for the audience that don't know me. I have fought this war in the 1980s. The whole tanker escort thing, 1980s, IRGC small boats, 1980s. We have spent 40 years running in and out of the Persian Gulf, confronting the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. We planned back in the 80s to seize those islands, and we needed 6,000 Marines. Back before Iran had 1,000 anti-ship missiles, hundreds upon hundreds of cruise missiles and suicide boats, thousands of drones, and thousands upon thousands of ballistic missiles. None of that existed back then. So imagine now that same plan. We can't do it. I'm saying this. We can land. We can take Abu Musa, Greater Tum, Lesser Tum. You can get a foothold on Kashem. You might even land on Lavan, Siri, Larak, Kish. But you're going to have to stand there as they bombard you day and night and cause hundreds, if not thousands, of U.S. casualties. And the pressure will be so bad, we will have to withdraw. You know why? Because the Gulf won't open for a year if we hit those islands. A year. To say you're going to take those islands is another way of saying you are willing to collapse the global economy, to cause mass starvation through this year by not allowing any urea nitrate or other chemicals in there. Most of the world's generic medicines come from India, and they need those chemicals out of the Gulf. So you're saying you're willing to do that. That's madness. And I've said this before, Trump's foreign policy is mental illness disguised as a government policy. So yes, the military is always going to keep preparing. General Kane is going to go, well, this may be a ceasefire, but we got to keep preparing for operations and contingencies as they exist. That is good. That is proper. But if someone is thinking, if JD doesn't get through with this, we're going to invade those islands, we're going to destroy Karg Island, you will destroy the entirety of the infrastructure of every one of our Gulf state allies. The problem is Trump does not think about consequences. He thinks about cool events and what they look like on TV. Him and freaking Pete Hegseth.
This is the tweet. Flight trackers caught dozens of C-17s and C-5s shuttling between Gulf states, Israel, Jordan, Saudi, and Kuwait right after the ceasefire dropped. We're talking C-17 cargo ships to Israel in a single day. Over 70 heavy transports in the first post-ceasefire window. This is resupply, not withdrawal. Munitions, equipment, Patriot systems, spare parts for aircraft that just flew 6 weeks for combat ops. The Pentagon openly said forces will stand ready and can resume with the same speed and precision the moment talks fail. Trump literally posted the quiet part, quote, all U.S. ships, aircraft, military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry will remain in place in and around Iran.
Sure. Makes sense.
Bluff, or is there a possibility that...
That's not bluff.
No.
That's not bluff. We froze. Everyone knew when they called a ceasefire that what would happen here is that all forces would stop. No flights over Iran, no flights over the Gulf, missiles at Gulf states. Everything freezes. All ceasefires give you an opportunity to evacuate your wounded, right? To assess your strategic position, to do an inventory of food, ammunition, and personnel. The IRGC are doing this too. At Yazid Mountain Ballistic Missile Complex, they're probably, all of those missile launchers are in giant tubes that go all the way up through the mountain. And we collapsed many of those launch holes. They're clearing those. They're clearing out the access ways. They're rotating new, fresh personnel into those places. Trucks that were hiding, that haven't been hit, are going to remain hidden. They're not going to move. The Iranians, on the other hand, and this is what I would expect, are probably moving around fake ballistic missile launchers, right? Or empty trucks to look like ballistic missile launchers and making the Americans freak out that the Iranians are now repositioning all their missiles. A lot of deception is going to go on both sides. But the U.S. going back and forth to these Gulf states, no one has been able to fly really heavy transport logistics missions. Also, bringing weapons, ammunition, and equipment in, resupply, bringing people out, especially at Al Udeid in Qatar, right? Those people are just sitting there getting bombarded. And Bahrain moving all 1,500 of the sailors out of the U.S. Fifth Fleet who have been assigned to their hotel rooms and their dormitories for the last 40 days because there's no base, right? So you have to expect these kind of things. Now, if you tell me that at one air base in Jordan, 40 aircraft have all suddenly landed, right, and loading operations are going on, then I would have to start thinking there may be a major airborne lift, a special operation, that whole talk about parachuting troops into Isfahan and seizing, Fardu or Natanz nuclear weapons research facility. That's a possibility, but we're not seeing that. I think what you're seeing is America surging what we call a surge movement of manpower, equipment, MREs, things like that, and definitely ammunition. And we also have to resupply all of our Arab allies. So every Patriot missile system that's in reserve in the United States is being flown forward and is going to be given to the Qataris, Emiratis, and them.
There's reports that China is also supplying man pads to Iran. I'll read that out to you in a second. I had a quick question. Do you think if they know where Mushtaba is, so there's reports that he's disfigured, that's why he's not appearing online. Reports saying everything. It's impossible to know. Others are he's still in hiding just in case they try to assassinate him. Do you think they would kill him right now in the negotiations if they know where he is? Would they actually do it?
You mean launch the war? Launch the war? I mean, just like boom, like Israel did on the 28th, attack at 12 noon while he's having lunch, right? If that's the case,
that would immediately restart the war, correct?
Yeah, of course it will restart the war. You can't go out and assassinate the supreme leader, all right? The supreme leader's son. And you know what? I'm sorry. If they were to come out and assassinate Mujtaba al-Khamenei, I would put in a 45-year-old guy next time, right? Some guy who spent his entire life in the IRGC imamate, right? And, bring over the Ayatollah Sistani from Iraq so that you can make it a double war, okay? And I would just make it so painful to the Americans that every time you hit us, you give us an upgrade, right? Younger, faster, more adaptive guys are more dangerous because their thought processes haven't petrified like 89-year-old men, right? Senior commanders in the Iranian army right now are my age, in their 60s. They killed off everybody in their 70s and their 80s. Great. And you know what I would do as a young guy? I would turn around and start finding the guys, deputies in their 40s. And I would say, whatever happens to me, I'll sit here and eat the missiles. You make it hurt. And they'd be like, okay, that means drones for everybody. These guys can be adaptive. And our biggest problem, and I say this 1,000 times, we don't respect them. And that's why we get multi-billion-dollar surprises.
That report now, according to multiple reports today, U.S. intel indicates China is preparing to deliver man pads, which are shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles, to Iran within the next few weeks. Key points of the reporting: the systems are man pads, portable heat-seeking weapons, effective against low-flying aircraft. I'm sure you'll explain it better. Some people are saying that was what was used against the F-15. Some people are reporting that shipments are reportedly being routed through third countries to obscure the origin. This would mark notable escalation. Blah blah blah. What do you think of this? And obviously the comment about the F-15.
Well, first off, the F-15 wasn't shot down by a man pad. It was shot down by a vehicle-launched, heat-seeking missile system. But it was a bigger, longer missile, like the length that we carry on our airplanes. A man-portable.
The man pads were the other aircraft that was shot. The
A-10 was shot down by a man pad.
Sorry,
yeah, the one that was damaged and the one that was shot down. They were shot down by man pads. But, I went to Stinger school when I was in the Ukrainian army. They put all of us legionnaires through Stinger school, and you carry it on your shoulder. It has a little cooled bulb and a seeker that's like super ultra cold, and it seeks out your heat signature. And once it locks on, boop, you shoot it, shoots up in the air, and it runs right up the tailpipe of your aircraft. Man pads are small, though. Those are a threat to helicopters, transports, low-flying A-10s. If the Chinese were to start sending them intermediary surface-to-air missiles, or even, the kind that shot down the F-15, right? These are vehicle-mounted heat-seeking missiles. That would be an upgrade. But you know what? When you call a ceasefire, all the rules are gone, right? China can buy anything they want. The question is, where are they going to land it? Or do they have viable runways? Are these things going to fly to like Turkmenistan and then be carried over the border or something along that lines? But yeah, when you have billions of dollars, and more importantly, you're getting paid now in Trump coin, and the value of your crypto increases as the risk of war decreases, you can buy anything. I think they're probably, if anything, if you were to say, well, they're buying man pads, I would say no. I suspect they are probably buying Shaheed guidance systems, more advanced, upgraded Shaheed guidance systems, or even kits, right? Like, give me 3,000 kits to replace that. But you know what they need more than anything? They need more Kia Bongo trucks, right, to turn them into launchers.
For the launches, yeah. How long do you think it will be if Iran really focuses on building air defenses that can stop future air dominance by the US and Israel? How long would it take them to achieve that? And why don't they have more S-300s or S-400s or equivalents from China?
Yeah, well, first off, the S-300 and the S-400 suck. The Ukrainians beat that system every damn day. They beat it like a redheaded stepchild. There is nothing that those weapon systems can do. The Israelis were the first ones to learn how to destroy them, and then the Ukrainians, you know how they destroy most of them? Little drones. They fly right up to them and crash into them. And now you have a $400 million system going skyrocketing all over the place. They should
even
get
the
away.
S-400, the S-400 is not that great either.
The 200's trash. The 400 and the 500, the Ukrainians beat the hell out of those all the time. They waste those weapon systems. They have proven to be awful, just awful. And no one is ever going to buy those Russian air defense systems again. Now, if the Iranians wanted to be clever, and this is where I had quite sort of a problem, but mainly because I can't see what's actually being fired. I would have thought anti-aircraft guns, actual physical guns, right? AAA, 60 millimeter, the old S60 60 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. You know, those things that create flak, they can make life unlivable to a certain extent. But you also have to be ready to have that gun, if it's not mounted on a truck, hit, right? ZSU-23-2 anti-aircraft guns, all these, we have learned, certainly in the Shahed drone world, that these guns actually have value. Those old flak guns and the kind that shoot 1 million bullets up in the air, you could make low altitude 1,000% unlivable. And that was the job of the Artesh, though, the regular Iranian army. And right now, I'm sure they're going through their warehouses and checking, see how much spare ammunition they have. But it would take the Iranians 3 to 5 years to get a good system. Now, if the Chinese go all in, and the Chinese start flying in air defense systems, which the Chinese would have to operate, right, in a post-war for a short period of time, and then train all these operators, that radar operators for IHawks and S-300s, the guys that didn't get killed, then that's a new animal, because we have never really fought those systems. One here, one there. But we don't know what an integrated Chinese anti-aircraft system looks like. And the Chinese, they don't skimp on guns, right? They would make you pay for every meter of altitude there. But that might cost Iran, 100, ships of oil.
A report just came out. Regional intelligence official told Bloomberg that 2 U.S. destroyers attempted to cross the Strait of Hormuz but were turned back. I saw similar reports earlier.
I've seen that 2 ways. Barak Ravid at Axios, who, as you know, is apparently the official leaker. He's the guy that everybody officially leaks to from the White House. He claims that it was 3 ships and that they ran the Strait of Hormuz. So I don't know. And we don't even know if the Mike Mansour, which was the one that popped up, whether that was real. We have the ability to fake an AIS, okay? That's the automated information system that you see on all tankers. And the way we know this is that the AIS of the Mike Mansour popped up on the southwestern side of the traffic separation scheme. But the last time we saw the Mike Mansour was on February 27th off of Dubai. So we don't even know if it left the Persian Gulf, because it generally shuts off during a war. But we could also be pretending the Mike Mansour and 2 other ships went through by running a fake signal of their AIS on a drone boat. By the way, we have drone boats out there, just to see what the Iranians will do. That's what I would do if I was on Intel staff. I would like, get them damn drone boats that you claim that you have, put the AIS signal on that, make it look like 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, and let's see what the Iranians do. The problem with the Iranians is the Iranians can do this. They can get binoculars out and then go, those are drone boats. right? I'm not going to waste the missile on that.
Have you seen the report about the mines? Let me read that out quickly to you.
Yeah.
That Iran, so I'll read out the report. Iran's biggest problem at the negotiating table might be one it created itself. The New York Times reports Iran can't fully reopen the Hormuz Strait because it literally cannot find all the mines it planted. The IRGC used small boats to mine the strait haphazardly in the early days of the war. Some mines were placed without recording exact locations. Others have drifted from where they were originally set. Arachi's reference to, quote, technical difficulties when announcing the strait would reopen was a diplomatic language for, quote, we minded our own waterway and can't undo it. So we mind it by and takes time to undo it. And there's also a report that the US has already started removing some of those mines. That was about an hour ago, 2 hours ago. How likely is it that there's a few mines? There were reports early in the war, midway through the war, that Iran has mined the straits, but just a handful of them, 10 to 12 or 10 to 15. And I saw it more of a warning shot against the US as, hey, we can mine the straits. We're going to put a handful there to show you that we can mine them. So stop doing whatever you're doing. How significant is that if they did mine it?
Well, it's very significant if they did mine it. Now, I want to point some inconsistencies out there. Again, I have a very deep history with the Persian Gulf. I have been in minefields. I've been in Iranian minefields. We helped capture Iranian mine layers. My ship had to tow a ship that hit a mine, the USS Samuel B. Roberts, out of the minefield while it was on smoking, on fire, and sinking, right? So unhealthy. And I hit an Iraqi mine in a minefield of 2,000 mines, okay? Got an extensive history with mines in the Persian Gulf.
Traumatized by the mines, Malcolm. You're traumatized by the mines.
Bro, you have no idea. When I had all that Iranian stuff in 88, and when I showed up in 91 for Desert Storm, this is all I kept saying at the intel briefings. Mines. They're going to mine. They're going to mine. They're going to mine. I had guys up there going, no, they're not. I go, they're going to mine every day for the next 2 months. They mined every day for the next 2 months. You have to understand it is an easy tool to use. And if you disrespect it, you do like I do. You hit one, right? And then you suddenly realize this wasn't a good idea. First off, there are no signs that there's mine sweeping going on in the Gulf. We do 2 types of mine sweeping. Now, you could use a drone boat, one of these, American drone boats that they have 4 or 5 of out in the Gulf, to carry an influence device or a noisemaker or a chain cutter in the device. This is a long piece of chain that has float buoys on it, and the chain cutters actually have metal claws that will cut the chains of moored mines. Moored mines are those World War II style with spikes that are held down to the bottom by chains. The other thing, it'll have a noisemaker, right? That'll make noises like it's the propeller of a ship. And that will design to explode influence mines. It'll put out a magnetic signature to blow up influence mines, right? Some mines actually listen for you. That's why they have that noisemaker. And it'll listen for the propellers. And when the propellers get close, it blows up. So those are the 3 big type of mines: contact mines, mines that are moored, influence mines that are bottom mines, influence mines, and noisemaker mines that are bottom, and torpedoes. So the Iranians have all of those. The only report we've seen, because we don't have access to U.S. intelligence, was that initial report that somebody said they saw 10 or 12 mines being loaded near Bandar Abbas. Yeah, but that's 10 or 12 mines. You saw that 5 minutes. This war's been going on for 44 days. I have been saying this since day one. The traditional Iranian mine layer, those ships that we sank in Bandar Abbas Harbor that could carry 4 mines, that's not how Iran has traditionally laid mines. They have traditionally laid mines in dhows, right? Those large wooden boats, and just have a ramp and kick them off to the side. Or they put 1 or 2 on small boats, get out there and throw them over physically, right? This is why you can't tell where the mines are. But here's one thing that I will discount. I saw a lot of floating mines in Desert Storm because it's a war crime to break the chain of a mine and let it just aimlessly drift into the maritime channels. And as a matter of fact, I went ashore in Ras Khalea Naval Base in Kuwait with an explosive ordnance disposal officer to document that war crime. And we found over 50 of the trolleys that have mines on them with no mine on the top, which means Iraq deliberately put them in the water without a mooring system, which is the war crime. When those things break, you find them because people see them. Ships coming through will see them. They will come up on the shore. We've seen no evidence of that. Desert Storm, we had less than 30 days of where we saw mining, and we saw unmoored mines, floating mines every day, all over the place. I think the Iranians are doing one of two things. And this brings me to, I'm sorry, I know I'm going long. You could have gone and gotten a coffee.
No, I love this. I love this.
In Desert Storm, at the end of Desert Storm, I went ashore to Ras Khalea Naval Base with one goal in mind, and I met that goal. I went ashore to find the map that had every mine laid in the Persian Gulf. I knew it had to exist. I knew it had to be on that base. It had to be in the command center somewhere. And we got there, we found everything had been burned, right? Except that I found this office where all the books were from Arab staff colleges, Iraqi War College, Egyptian War College. And I said, this is a general's office. And under a section of wall that had collapsed because it got hit by a bomb, we found that map. And it showed precisely where every one of 2,000 mines were laid. Somewhere in Bandar Abbas, that map exists. And the Iranians will go do this. The IRGC will be like, well, we went out there, we dropped them in the water. They got a map. They're just not going to give it to us. And they're never going to give it to us. They will keep it for their own purposes. What they want is they want us to come in there with our one minesweeper littoral combat ship, or use the Nighthawk helicopters that we carry that carry those chains and sleds. And they want us to hit a mine. They don't have to do jack shit now. Right? All they have to do is sit still and say, I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you'll find the mines, maybe you won't. Right? Looking cute. That's what they're doing. So as long as we're screwing with them and there is no peace, they have no obligation as far as they're concerned to tell us a damn thing. When the Iraqis surrendered to Schwarzkopf, they didn't lie when they said all our mines are between point A and point B. Right? Because the Iraqi high command doesn't know. But the Iraqi office that I went into knew. And the only person that went into that office was me. And that map was turned over to Schwarzkopf. And he was like, oh, you mean this map you should have given us? The Iranians have a map. They probably have 3 or 4.
Yeah.
They're just not going to give it to us.
And regarding the rearmament that we're seeing on the, at least on the Iranian side, how quickly would it take for them to rebuild their military capabilities, move away from the infrastructure?
Years. But what capability are we talking about? Because the Artesh,
the one that matters is the one that matters the most is the drones. No, that's probably the one that's the most effective for them to be able to keep the closest Strait of Hormuz whenever they need. That will be the first one they focus on. Do you agree?
Remember how you and I went through this exercise about 3 weeks ago of how many drones they had left? And I said, well, they started with 88,000. Let's assume the United States destroys half of that. That leaves 44,000. Let's assume that they shoot 4,000. That brings them down to 40,000. And then 3 weeks later, we find out that they are claiming they have 38,000 or somewhere around there, 35, 38,000, which shows that our estimate was right on. Just sitting here calculating the numbers in space. 35,000 drones is a shitload of drones. And right now, every drone truck is being accounted for. Everyone that didn't go do their duty during this war, that was too afraid to come out, is getting shot, right? New guys are going to be assigned to these trucks. Trucks are getting inventory. They're going to make sure that they have batteries, and that they're going to make sure that the next phase of war, should it happen, is going to happen. If we go to a peace where the war is declared over, right? You're going to see all those trucks come out. They're going to go out into the open. They're going to be doing inventory on them. And they're going to go out and they're going to restore as many drones as possible. And if I were the Iranians, I'd go, you know what? Clearly, 88,000 wasn't enough. Let's bring that up to 100,000. And let's start pretending like we're the Ukraine of the Middle East and start building everything drone and ignore air defense, ignore army buying tanks. You don't need any damn tanks. You need more Toyota pickups and more Kia Bongo trucks, because that has been their most effective weapon. And I would let the Pakistanis come and raise all those ships out of Bandar Abbas and scrap all those damn ships that got sunk and never rebuild your navy. The Ukrainians destroyed an entire navy without having a navy. That's the lesson. The Iranians, if it's a young guy like me, oh yeah, the Iranians aren't building any of that old shit.
We talked earlier about them replacing the supreme leader again with someone younger if the US dares or Israel dares to kill him, and that will start the war again. One thing I'm trying to figure out, what do you think his policy would be? We know he's more, at least based on initial reports, he's more radical than his father. Again, that's what the initial report said, number one. He could be a lot more, angry with the US, a lot more vengeful with the US because they just killed his whole family, destroyed his country in a pretty, the whole way was conducted at a pretty low way, during negotiations to start a war like this. But however, he could also be more pragmatic. He might come in and say, I want a different strategy. I think we're going to focus on drones. We're going to dismantle our proxy network if we get XYZ in return. So US, you guys lift the sanctions, we'll dismantle the proxy network. We will focus on our drones. We'll focus on our missile program. We'll get rid of our nuclear program because we don't need it. Our new nuclear bomb is now called the Strait of Hormuz. So, but if we introduce to the financial system, we're no longer ostracized. We keep our two most important deterrents, and that is the ballistic missile program to cause havoc in the whole region, and the drone program to be able to close the Strait of Hormuz along with the mines, and then stop the proxy network. That will be pretty significant for the entire region, especially Lebanon, but Israel, Lebanon, Syria.
The problem is I take that stop the proxy network off the table. You can't. Yeah, you cannot. This isn't politics. That's betrayal of your co-religionists. And we've talked about that.
Not destroy not getting the dismantle, like just keep Hezbollah, but dismantle them as a military group and just keep them as a political group. These are discussions that are happening.
How are you going to do that? Right? How are you going to do that? These people are technically Murabatun, right? They're dispossessed. What are you going to do? I think Iran could do this. They could stop. They can't fly military equipment in anymore, right? But they could give $1 billion of zakat, right, of charity, and let Hezbollah do what they want to do there with their own money. Of course, the Israelis will try to take it. They'll bomb every bank. They will continue to sustain the war. But money talks, right? And Hezbollah and Iranian intelligence, the IRGC, their problem was they were literally face to face in the room coordinating all the time. I think this will, we've had a show about this. The new Hezbollah that's going to come out of this is going to be very young, and they're going to want to taste blood, but they're going to gain that blood in new methods. FPV drones, right? 15-year-old kids sitting in their house, nowhere near the battlefront, 40 kilometers away, killing Israeli soldiers one by one with a surprised look on their face as that drone comes and smacks him and literally decimates him. That's going to be the new Hezbollah. And you don't need proxy for that. You just need money.
But what about everything else? Like what do you think Mustafa will be like? How will the new Iran be like? What concessions will they accept? Would they change their whole strategy? Because for decades now, it's been a proxy strategy as well as not a nuclear program, but hey, we can build a nuclear bomb if we decide, because they're enriching from the 60 whatever to the 90 whatever percent is the easy part. So like, hey, we'll do that if you guys kind of cross certain lines. So it was the threat of building a nuclear weapon but not building one, the proxy network, and of course their ballistic missile program, and more recently their drone program. How could that shift? Because I think Iran would also love that. Remember, their economy was in shambles. They were facing protests in January. So we could also see an Iran that shifts, that changes to be allowed in the global community. I don't think they'll mind that much rapprochement with the Western world.
Well, first off, we got to always stop looking at Iran with a Western mentality. I think that the democratic protest movement in Iran is dead, right? I've heard people in interviews who were in Iran, not Western journalists, right? Iranian and Arab journalists there, hearing these people go, well, America's attacking us with the Jews, right? We're not going to stand up and get shot down in the street over this. The biggest mistake that we made was, and I've said this many times on many different forums, revolutions have to start naturally from within. If we keep, I had a friend come and say, I'm watching videos of guys doing run and gun machine gun attacks on IRGC checkpoints. All you're doing is now bringing a clenched fist down on the average Iranian and making it look that anyone who is truly a small L liberal Democrat who wants to help free their country, you're sentencing them to death because they're the people that they're going to capture and execute and claim that are working as agents of Israel and Donald Trump. So I don't know what a new Iran will look like. I will tell you this much. Right now, Iran is making bank. I mean, it's like Donald Trump is their ATM. We're about to raise all sanctions on them. We raised all sanctions on every drop of oil they had on the high seas or that makes it to the high seas. Iran is going to turn a profit of $180 billion. All right. And I say that like, Dr. Evil, $180 billion just charging toll on the Strait of Hormuz. Just charging toll, that's actually more value than the value of the oil in the ships. They probably are kicking themselves in the ass for thinking, why didn't we do this back in the 80s when we could have owned this place, right? But Donald Trump is the guy who thinks like that oil fields and things are always transactionable. I can buy you, you can offer money, I can get something. Isn't that how we started these negotiations? Pakistan secretly offering 8 oil tankers of oil for Donald Trump. Do you remember that? That was just 3 weeks ago. They claimed they gave him a gift of 8 oil tankers and then said, no, Donald, 10 tankers. That kind of graft and grift is how they speak when you're a gangster leader. And the Iranians are world-class beyond OG. They're like the Tupac, all right? No, they're like, these guys are older than that, right? These guys are like the Sugar Hill gang of OGs. So you can't outplay them because everything in that region has been based on how they crafted the region. All you can do now is get your Gulf state buddies to pray that you don't start the war again. Iran is going to start from that point, and there's nothing we can do about it. We picked this fight. This is the result.
Could Iran, there's one thing that I worry about, could Iran, that's a lot more emboldened now, could they start could they go too far? Could they want to control the Strait of Hormuz for more than a few months, a year or 2 years, or even try to make it permanent? Could they seek to make their proxies even stronger than they were before and keep the nuclear program as it was before? Maybe agree on no nuclear enrichment, but enrich it behind the scenes.
I mean,
without announcing it to the IAEA. If they do this, because again, many people, they're being treated as heroes in Pakistan, and I worry that give them overconfidence and they end up going too far and triggering a new war.
Man, I keep using the analogy of the camel souk. The Pakistanis, the Gulf states, and the Iranians, these are camel salesmen. They all know how to sell camels. They know what the product is. The only people that are going to get rolled here is JD Vance and Marco Rubio. They're not from the camel souk. They're out trying to buy camels, right? And they're going to get the nastiest old camels. And when they get them home, it's going to be a donkey with the word camel written on the side. I mean, they just don't understand the environment they're playing in. And the Persians, the Kurds, the Iraqis, the Pakistanis, the Baluch, the Afghans, they all understand each other. They know what it means when they're jiving. I have to tell you, I'm going to show you this because this is a little lesson for you Westerners who are constantly coming up on Twitter and saying nobody, we're so awesome, we know how to negotiate. If you want to learn how things go over there, you got to memorize this book, Alf Layla wa Layla, right? 1001 Arabian Nights, the original unexpurgated version, because everything you need to know about the fundamental basis of culture is encapsulated in all of these stories, half of which were Persian. You understand that you are not them. and you will never be them. Therefore, you will have a hard time understanding them. But J.D. Vance thinks, I'm coming in my best suit. I'm on Air Force 2. I got lots of armed guys. The Pakistanis cleared the entire city for us. I'm going to get something. Yeah, you're going to get rolled. Rudyard Kipling said that, right?
The US has discussed releasing $6 billion worth of Iranian assets with Pakistani mediators, but it's unclear whether they'll agree to do so, according to the Financial Times. We reported it yesterday as unconfirmed, but they're already talking about releasing Iranian.
On Tuesday.
Yeah, that came in. That was yesterday. Now it came in on the Financial Times as well, so it's a more reliable source. But that's too big of a concession so early.
Hey, they already gave up $14 billion by releasing all the oil that was sanctioned. Now $6 billion, right, as a goodwill thing, because this is Trump thinking he's going to earn trillions on this, right? He thinks that he's rolling them.
How?
You got to understand.
By sharing the toll booth at the Straits?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like that scene in Goodfellas.
China won't allow this. China won't allow this to happen. Which scene in Goodfellas? I love this movie. Which scene?
Well, I was just going to say, it's like Joe Pesci in the restaurant, right? Trump thinks he's Joe Pesci in the restaurant. Oh, you think I'm a funny guy? You think I'm funny? Like he's speaking in menace, but everything is a threat. The threat is not Joe Pesci, besides the fact that he's insane. It's everyone else at the table. The problem is everyone else at the table. Joe Pesci in this scenario is Iran. And everyone at the table is seeking to stop that guy from going crazy on everybody else. And he ain't going to end up in an empty room standing on plastic. Trump is like the guy who's got a corner shop who thinks he's going to outmob the mob. It's crazy talk.
There's a professor I had on the show just 2 hours ago on this live. So just not the one before you, but the one before that. No, not him. The one just before that. And he made a point. This name is Professor Gibbs. A really interesting professor. It was a great discussion. I think we would have liked him. And he made a point. He's like, Mario, I think the likelihood of Iran building a nuclear war program, a nuclear weapon, has increased now. Because look what happened, the North Korea, Yemen example. But now Iran is in a position saying, hey, we were worried before that if we build one, the US could attack us. Well, now we're no longer worried about this, about the US attacking us, because we know, at least for the foreseeable future, the US won't dare to attack us and get stuck in this again. That'll be in their mind, and they'll end up building a nuclear weapon. Is that a good fear to have? Not a good fear. Is that legitimate fear to have?
Yeah, actually, I will give you a better, more historical, intelligence-based sample of this. When the Israelis flew, I can't remember how many F-16s, 25 F-16s into Iraq in 1979 to destroy Saddam Hussein's Osirak test nuclear reactor, right? We later learned that Saddam and Iraq were never building a nuclear weapon. That was the Israelis' mindset, that an Arab state wouldn't have a nuclear reactor unless they were planning to build an atomic bomb. So Israel flew in there, bombed Osirak, cracked the container, right? Left, and that supposedly ended Iran's nuclear program, right? Saddam was not looking in that direction. And as soon as the Israelis flew out of their airspace, Saddam had meetings and said, they fear an atomic bomb more than anything. So what do you think Saddam did? Crash program to get an atomic bomb. Right? And they made all sorts of crazy things, man. I mean, they were making a super rail gun that would launch a shell into space and it would come down on Israel. They increased their Scud ballistic missile program, which, by the way, Iran and Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war engaged in the same ballistic missile war that you saw with the Gulf states, right? It was called the War of the Cities. And every day for years, they were bombarding Tehran and Baghdad with these ballistic missiles. So how nobody could remember that they wouldn't do this to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states is beyond me. It's happened before many times. So the same thing with the nuclear program. I think Iran now knows Israel is mortally terrified of a nuclear bomb. Now, these things could happen. Iran only has 450 kilograms, almost 1,000 pounds of uranium that is been enriched to 60%.
We forgot about that. Everyone was talking about it throughout the war. Now suddenly it's no longer an issue.
It's still there. If I were the
Yeah.
Iranians, I wouldn't go near that place until a peace has happened. And then I would blitz it with 1,000 construction workers. I would dig that thing out. Then I would make 40 different freaking decoy containers and spread them all over Iran, right? And then
Oh.
let those things be seen by satellites and shit, right? So that the Israelis can't hit you and the Americans can't hit you because it's peace, right? Not ceasefire, peace. But what I would do if I were Iran is, and I get a lot of yahoos on your Twitter feed are like, you're giving Iran answers. You don't think these people know this? With 60% enriched uranium, you could detonate an atomic bomb, a very rudimentary World War II size atomic bomb. You could bring it out to the Baluch
Oh.
Desert. You could set it up, watch the movie Oppenheimer if you want, but it would be huge, right? And then you detonate it and you say, we're now an atomic power. But you would use most of that 450 kilograms of uranium. Iran is trying to get to 90% enriched uranium. That's real weapons grade.
Trying, isn't
90%.
they want to get
They
there?
want to, but we've destroyed all the centrifuges. Although we don't know that. Those centrifuges in Natanz could still be up. Maybe 50% of them operate. Iranians were building them themselves too. So in a few years, they could enrich enough uranium to get to 90%, right? That's theoretical. We don't know if that's true. Or, you could ask China to sell you all the parts to assemble 5 or 10,000 more centrifuges and build a new underground city inside a real mountain. And then in a few years, have enough for 90% enriched and grade. All you need is a basketball-sized nut of plutonium that is 90% enriched. That's enough to put into a ballistic missile warhead. And that's what Iran wants. They want an atomic bomb that can fit on the top of a missile, like a Khorramshahr 4 or a Fakir missile. And that would be it. Israel would have to make a decision whether to nuke Iran, because that's the only way you're going to get it. Right? Not the cities, but wherever they suspect it's stored.
That was my next
and
question.
They might be wrong.
Israel, I was going to ask you, would Israel ever allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon? The other question is, could they stop them? If we couldn't beat them in this war, how else could we beat them? But Israel could always strike Iran whenever Iran gets close to building a nuclear weapon. They've killed their scientists before. They've sabotaged their nuclear program. They've hacked into it.
Yeah, but how you're killing all these guys and the program still goes forward. The enriched uranium still exists. And they won't be using that stuff for like JD Vance for a dirty bomb. This is atomic bomb. Now, if I were Iran, I'd just find $1 trillion, go to North Korea and say, I'd like to buy 5, please. That'd make them a nuclear power overnight.
Would the world allow that to happen? Would they allow these nuclear weapons to be transported?
The only people that could stop that would be China.
I was going to ask, would China make it happen?
But, that's pie in the sky. That's the sort of stuff that,
and what would,
but
Malcolm,
Israelis
what would Turkey, what would Saudi, what would they all do? What would the Gulf do now that is a nuclear armed Iran? Look, all these countries want to also be nuclear armed.
The Saudis are under the Pakistani nuclear umbrella, and the Saudis themselves have nuclear ambitions, right? We don't, and we don't know what the Emirates is doing down at the Baraka nuclear power plant. We don't know whether that thing is going to be quietly churning out plutonium.
Do you think it's possible that one of the Gulf countries like the Emirates is building a nuclear weapon behind the scenes?
No. But they could be aspirational. For a very long time, Iran, before Iran had ballistic missiles, Saudi Arabia had bought, I believe, 4 intermediate range ballistic missiles from China and had them in a mountain missile complex before they went defunct. So everyone has some aspirations.
Yeah, because the Gulf countries want to make sure the Gulf countries would need the likelihood they'll be nuked.
Nobody's getting nuked.
Is that what you said? Oh, okay. I thought you said the likelihood of getting nuked. Would those countries?
No, the Israelis might nuke somebody. The Israelis definitely might. If Netanyahu's in power in Iran, let's say Iran detonates a nuclear test bed, right? Which means something we missed, and they could do it. I mean, it's rudimentary. They don't have enough for a real atomic bomb, but for a real launchable atomic bomb, but they have enough to launch, to demonstrate, like Oppenheimer, at at an actual function, to show that they have the tech to do it. Well, university students can build and design and detonate an atomic bomb with the right materials. But then at that point, it'll be Netanyahu saying, you will turn over all materials or we will nuke Tehran. And just to make sure that you understand what we're doing, we're going to do a mini nuke at the Yazid, ballistic missile city. Right now, disarm. That's it. That's as far as you can go. But we will be on what we call, when I worked at the National Nuclear Command Post, we will be beyond the exchange threshold. We will be in that world where these things are now being used like bombs over Dahlia.
Holy shit, man! That's a pretty scary world. And
It
wouldn't the
is.
Gulf
I mean,
countries?
but you got to project. You got to project that this is a 1%, 2% possibility.
How are Gulf countries going to deter future aggression from Iran?
Playing nice.
That's it.
Iran is the bully who has now beaten everybody on the street and beaten the bullies that you brought in. All you can do, I mean, if you're going to have a running gun battle with the Iranians, just know that you're going to run out of bullets before they get you. So that means a new way of looking at Iran will have to be crafted, especially for countries like Qatar.
Malcolm, are we seeing the fall of the American empire?
Well, that's an interesting phrase. I think Donald Trump has single-handedly run through the American empire with like a drunk monkey with a fully automatic machine gun, dancing and spinning and shooting everything that he sees. That's my analogy. He has broken all of the functions and norms that have kept the American empire together. Right now, he is on a one-man mission. He said this back in 2018 to the Prime Minister of Sweden, that he would get the United States out of NATO. NATO won't collapse without Trump. The North American part, the North Atlantic part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is Canada and Greenland, right? So it will just become an organization with 31 countries, not 32 countries. But they will kick us out of every fucking base in Europe. The United States will have to fly from Norfolk, Virginia, nonstop, all the way to Tel Aviv before they meet an ally that will let them land to carry out power projection around the world. We will be on our own. And Trump, I've written 4 New York Times bestsellers about Trump and his crazy relationship with Vladimir Putin. And if Putin himself were elected president of the United States, he couldn't have destroyed America the way Trump did. Trump did it out of pure greed, avarice, and ego, narcissism. So yeah, we're seeing the end of the American empire.
But couldn't one argue that he's pressured NATO to start increasing their defense spending and become more self-reliant? Because the US has been carrying most of the load for all these years. That's at least the argument that people make.
No, that's an argument that people make. That was an ideological choice we made when we landed in Normandy on D-Day. Speaking of which, this is my D-Day jacket I got from Normandy. San Mary-Glise, baby. So that's an argument that we made as a nation, ideologically, that we would remain the dominant power. We would create that axis of allies, right? Our alliance. We would stay together in light of communist aggression. And then when communist aggression fell, we would stay together to defend each other against new threats as they emerge in the world. And that first threat was 9/11. And NATO sacrificed over 1,000 of their soldiers defending America against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And Trump came in and is flipping the bird at them because he doesn't believe in it, because he believes a Russian worldview. I've made this prediction many times in my books and on television and radio. Donald Trump someday in the future, when it's found out what his real relationship is with Russia, there will be no presidential portrait of him. There will be a black cloth hung over where his portrait is.
You really?
I am dead. I absolutely believe that his worldview is Moscow's worldview. The evidence is overwhelming, overwhelming. And you hear these people go, "Oh, but you're just part of the Russia hoax." I don't have to be. You don't have to ask me. Ask the Russians. Ask Trump. Trump proves it with his every action. He has given Ukraine 0 defense munitions in the last year. 0. It's not so he can make
But he
Europe
sold,
self-sufficient. He wants to
he
weaken
sold.
Europe.
He's given them 0 for free, but he sold them whatever they need.
No,
through
he
Europe.
hasn't sold them. He hasn't. That deal in which they were supposed to buy $150 billion worth of weapons using European money has not been delivered. Nothing. It's like we had cut them off. The only thing they're getting right now is intelligence and some logistic support. Zhuzhov Airport, outside of Przemysl, near the Ukrainian-Polish border, which I had been to 100 times, not 100 times, but dozens of times, was the U.S. air hub into Ukraine. It closed the week after Trump took power. They pulled all the Patriot missiles out of there. They took all the U.S. Air Force people out of there. They're sending nothing to Ukraine. Trump believes in the absolute power of Vladimir Putin. He believes in the dictatorship of Viktor Orban, who's about to go down. Orban's about to get elected out of power. There is a backlash against these oligarchs. I coined the phrase axis of oligarchs, axis of autocracies. And that's what Trump wants to be part of.
It's hard to call Orban. It's hard to call Trump an autocrat when he's about, his term's about to end, and Orban an autocrat when he's got elections tomorrow. A lot of people expect him to lose.
Trump's term just started. He's only been in a year out of 4.
No, I mean, this is a second term out of a 2-term limit.
This is the same guy. This guy doesn't believe in the transition of power. He's not going to leave office. He's not. He tried it last time. And the only thing that got him was the will of the people. Trump is going to go out of office feast first. I think his health will take him out. It's always been his major flailing. If you look at all the stuff that's going on, he wears diapers, he wears freaking double colostomy and urine bags. You can see him, all right? Don't believe me. Health is going to be his issue. The question is, does J.D. Vance go along this crazy route of hate everybody, hate the world? America is now hated. Europe thinks America, 36%, the majority, the plurality of Europeans believe America is the #1 threat in this world. I travel to Europe all the time and they go, "Not you, man. I'm talking about Trump. MAGA." So yeah, we're hurt. The American empire is cracking because he's cracking it.
Could that change? Couldn't it change as soon as there's a new administration? The whole perception changes.
It could, but now the world knows that there is a crazy 33% in the United States that will kill people and imprison their own citizens and try to ethnically cleanse, 20 million, hardworking emigres in the United States. The world now knows that a third of the United States would embrace Nazism if they could.
Oh, you're very critical of MAGA.
They're fucking crazy. Okay? I'm not joking. I've spent my entire life defending America, and I got crazy motherfuckers out here who would rather destroy America to have their little slice of it. Right? That whole DEI, they go DEI. You know what we used to call diversity, equity, and inclusion in the military? Teamwork. Teamwork. No, not these guys. They would rather destroy America.
As a final question, then, what does that do to Chinese-U.S. relations? What is China's influence in the region? What is China's role in Europe? Because China's got its hands everywhere, but no one really talks about it. Even though it's calling a lot of the shots, it told Iran to accept the peace deal. It's keeping Russia in the war, but it's doing it very subtly without these big, audacious statements and visits to different countries. There's a visit to North Korea by the foreign minister. I think that was pretty big. But there's nothing like what
China,
what the Russians or Europeans or the Americans are doing.
China is the adult in the room now. Just think about that. The Chinese are playing it very cool.
Sorry, in the media just said talks have gone well so far. America's listening to us. That's according to an Iranian delegate.
Yeah. We making
Sorry to
bank.
interrupt you.
America is listening to Iran almost in that bizarre. I mean, because they are so desperate to get the Strait of Hormuz open, desperate to get the SOH open, get oil moving. It's now the money is impacting everybody to where the insider trading and wheeling and dealing these guys did is now impacting all of Trump's friends, all of Trump's investments. I will make this prediction every time I come on your show, Mario. All those projects and commitments of money that the Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis said, Trump International Golf Course, Trump high rise, Trump skyscraper in Riyadh, Trump Tower in Doha, they're done. Never getting made. Never. And all they're going to say is, we don't have the money right now. We need 5 years to recover from this war. That's what Trump's most concerned about. But you know what? JD Vance is in that room, probably high-fiving, shaking hands, acting like he's the VIP in the VIP room with the stripper. Okay? When you're in the VIP room with the stripper, you're the one getting played. You're the one giving up your money.
So what does that mean for China? What is?
Oh, China?
Because if we
China's
see
the people.
if we see
China is running the bank for everybody. While we're doing stupid shit, China is making money. While we're closing 17 embassies and consulates in Africa, China is buying Africa and getting 1.2 billion people as permanent customers. While we're ignoring Asia, China goes out and spreads goodwill. While we're flipping the bird, dropping a billion, almost $100 billion worth of expenditure on Iran, China is getting ready to get paid by Iran to replace everything from plastic dishes to food to air defense systems to new bridges. And you know what the Iranians going to be buying from China? Deep tunnel boring systems in large numbers. That's how they got the Yazid Mountain ballistic missile complex. Chinese tunnel boring machines. They're going to buy 50 now. Everything in Iran's going underground over the next 5 years. Everything. And then the Americans won't ever be able to touch them. A nuke won't be able to touch them. So China is making bank. Yeah,
that
sure.
deep, they can go deeper than they are now.
Mile and a half. Anybody can go a mile and a half. We have
So
command
that makes
posts a mile underground.
that reduces the impact of having air dominance significantly.
It doesn't matter if you have air dominance.
Yeah, exactly.
While you're bombarding your neighbors into submission, the Americans will never be able to hit Iran again. We could always break contract here. We could always break the ceasefire and keep dropping bombs. And now we've hit Iran with everything we have except a nuke. And have you seen any change in their behaviors? Did the same thing in Vietnam. They won. They're making our Nikes now. We're all eating pho. So explain that to me. The problem is, how am I, as a senior enlisted man with 40 years operating in that field, seeing this? And JD Vance walks in with virtually nobody from the State Department. His brother-in-law, right, who is a real estate broker, who really just wants the Saudi money. He just wants access to the money. I'll bet you if the Iranians put money on the table, this deals would get very spicy very quickly. But they're not. The Iranians are getting paid this time. And Trump and Vance are going to give it to them because they need that. They need that, or the global economy will crack. Trump will capitulate. We have lost this war.
Or he could double down. I keep trying to win it. Which is the worst thing. You keep trying to win something, get into a quagmire.
If he starts shooting again, the economy will break in 2 weeks. They already told us they can't sustain this past 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, so
right?
But this has always been a deterrent for Trump to continue.
Not the military. I'm talking about the economic. Forget about military.
I'm saying it's been a deterrent. The economic collapse is Iran's deterrence for the US continuing the war. But what if Trump is in a position? He's like, you know what? For me to control the Strait of Hormuz, for my legacy, or for the US strategic interests, it's more important. If the global economy crashes for 3 to 6 months, we're energy we're energy exporters and not importers, but we export a lot of energy as well. We've got our own energy. We can sustain that economic collapse in a way that it is worth it for long term.
That is Hitler. That is Führer bunker talk, right? That's you looking for divisions that don't exist to come rescue you from the Soviets that are literally above you 100 meters away. That's crazy talk. Anyone who thinks that's a possibility, like that moron, Mark Thiessen, right, who I still owe a waterboarding to. The only guy I've ever said I would waterboard. I said I would never waterboard again because I ran the waterboard, but that guy deserves it. I mean, he is crazy. If he's like, kill these guys who were in the room talking to you, whose hands you're shaking.
Yeah, that was really
Right?
upsetting.
You know what Iran will do? Iran will cut a deal with the Gulf states. They'll say, abandon the United States. There will be free passage for everybody, no easy pass, except America. And if the Americans show up, we're going to war. And all of you will lose your industries. We won't, but you will.
Whew, I mean, I've got Matt Targer coming up. I know I went overtime. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Matt's going to give you a great pie in the sky summary, I'm sure. Matt believes in this American power. But I'm a hard realist, man. I am a hard realist. If you ask for my intelligence assessment, you're going to get the facts. I will not fudge just because you guys want to feel good about yourselves, because that will kill my fellow citizens dead, my fellow service members. And that isn't worth it.
Malcolm, thank you so much for your time, sir. I appreciate it, man, as always.
You're welcome. I'm going to go cut the grass now because we all need to touch grass. I'm telling you.
Man, you do that.
All right.
You
Take care, Mario.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, man. All right, Matt, how are you?
Doing well, Mario. How are you today?
How you doing, brother?
I feel like I need to get a lobotomy after listening to Malcolm speak, but other than that, you know, I'm happy he's going to cut the grass to get out some aggression, which I don't even think he knows who he's mad at today.
What do you think of the PC? Like, we haven't spoken in a while, so it's good to get your thoughts on everything.
Yeah, it's just as doomed as the first one. It's odd to me that they're even having it. To be honest, I'm not sure why they would. Well, okay, so you've got the United States. It's very clear on uranium enrichment. Can't have uranium enrichment, right? And you've got Iran that's very firm on that one as well. And then, in my opinion, it kind of goes bad faith. You know, I looked at what the original statement from the Iranian foreign minister that got put out, which was the U.S. to be stopping attacks on Iran. There was nothing else that he had put in his public message that he had shared. And then an hour and a half later, we end up getting a message from the Pakistani prime minister that all of a sudden includes Lebanon as part of that deal. That's what they're claiming. And that happens to be the one that's getting all of the attention, not the original one that, Iran ends up sharing. Then, we're supposed to have free traffic flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, which isn't happening. It's not free traffic. They're charging tariffs for people to go through there. So there's all sorts of different things that are going on right now. And that's why I look at it and I go, I'm not even sure why we're having a peace deal.
All right. So let's talk about Lebanon first. So according to Lebanon, Iran said from the get-go that Lebanon was included. And then Pakistan, which is the mediator there, I know they're very critical of Israel, but they're also trying to improve relations with the US. They're very supportive of the US. They gave him credit for ending the war with India. So the rapprochement with the US has been going strong since Trump took office. So I just don't think that
how many members of Hezbollah are within the Lebanese parliament?
There's a lot.
A lot, right? So
yeah, but no,
the
but the goal
from
was
Lebanon doesn't necessarily when you have members of Hezbollah. The ceasefire with Hezbollah took place November of 2024, and they're not supposed to be south of the Litani River. They're in violation of that. They're also in violation of UN Resolution 1701. That's a fact. Like, there's no debating that.
I understand. I'm saying it was the ceasefire. Ceasefire is called a ceasefire because it's a ceasefire. It's not a peace deal or an end to the hostilities. A ceasefire is there to. Trump made that deal. Now, one could argue Israel has agency. They could continue the war, but Trump made the deal. He might have accepted Lebanon just as a way. I think he just wants to off-ramp. He wanted to end it through whatever means necessary. The reports were that Netanyahu was only informed just before the peace deal happened, it was hours before or minutes beforehand, that this is the deal that the US going to accept, and he wasn't too happy with it. Called Trump the next day. Some say he was informed afterwards. But then he called Trump and said, look, we can't accept the ceasefire, because we saw Trump and others walking it back. I think that for Iran to say it, and then the Pakistan to put their foot down and not to be silent about it, to explicitly say that Lebanon was included, I have a feeling Lebanon would have been included.
Have you looked at the statements of the Iranian foreign minister the day of, the exact same time Trump made his announcement? It doesn't include Lebanon. It doesn't include anything. It's just for us to stop bombing Iran. There's no mention of Lebanon whatsoever. And then when you go back and you take a look at the Pakistani prime minister and you look at the previous statements that he's made and the statements that he's made up until this day, we got somebody that very, very clearly is not an impartial third party, somebody that has like an agenda that hates Israel, hates the United States of America, and is pushing it very, very hard. Somebody that's giving condolences for the Ayatollah being killed, saying that they stand firm with Iran. And these are all things that the Pakistani prime minister has said in the past. He stands firm with Iran. He is on Iran's side. Like, he's made that very clear. And then when we start talking about all of the members of Hezbollah within the Lebanese parliament, and so if Lebanon comes out and says, no, it was a part of it in the first place, great. Your word is trash, absolute trash. When you have Hezbollah that's within there, not to mention they're still in violation of the original, ceasefire from November of 24, and in violation of UN Resolution 1701. So at what point does the world get to sit back and go, you know what, maybe we can't take their word for this anymore, that they're actually going to keep up and do their things in good faith like they say they are? At what point do you trust those people?
Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you talked about the Strait of Hormuz, the freedom of navigation. Well, Trump himself posted that the idea of sharing a toll booth with Iran was a good idea. It would be good for both parties.
I saw that. So, idiot.
Yeah, but that at least indicates that the U.S. knew that the Strait of Hormuz will be controlled by Iran, at least for a foreseeable future. Maybe it's a way for them to get reparations without the Americans paying it. So
well,
it could be
I don't know about that.
Solution.
I think maybe it could have been one of those things that was on the discussion table. I think it could have been one of those talking points, not necessarily whether or not the U.S. was going to do it or whether or not Iran was going to do it, but something that would be within the discussion, like the framework of what they want to talk about. And I think Iran just went ahead and jumped on it ahead of time.
But it's true. I'm sure Iran's 10-point plan was very maximalist for a reason. They want to start at a pretty...
Yeah, of course.
And they came out of this feeling, I don't know, do you consider Iran have won strategically? Is that fair to say?
No.
Really?
No, not yet. No. Like, in what ways? Because we still have the ability to strike them. I mean, we landed two C-130s in their backyard, flew up to a mountaintop, rescued a down pilot, and then left. True. And they didn't kill American.
That shows American military dominance around the world that I don't think anyone questions. But the U.S. was not able or willing or able or both to open the Strait of Hormuz, despite Trump saying. So Trump literally said, "I'm going to read our tweet for you. You're probably not going to like it. I wrote a couple of days ago.
Send it, man. Send it. I like this.
I'll read it. I'll read it out to you. It's just me making fun of the U.S. winning strategically. But essentially, the U.S. said that. Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said, we'll open the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to escort the ships out there. That didn't happen. I think the secretary, Scott Bessent, said, we escorted a ship through the Strait of Hormuz, then deleted the tweet. Then later, Trump was like, hey, all allies need to help.
One. Okay.
Oh, yeah. So he posted about it that one ship was escorted. That was a while ago, early days of the war, then deleted it. The markets really reacted really positively to it, then collapsed right after he deleted it. Then it was Trump saying to all American allies, you need to help us open the Strait of Hormuz. Everyone's like, nope. And the entire global Navy, all countries combined, are no match to the American Navy. All of them combined, including China. And now this is Trump requested that those allies, NATO, China, India, even Pakistan, to help open the Strait of Hormuz. And no one accepted. So wouldn't you consider that a strategic win? And add to it the fact that the Iranians that were meant to have 20% of their missile launchers left, then later a report came out that they have 50% of them left.
They're pulling more out of ground.
No, either or they had more, or they're just either they could repair them, or some of them could have been destroyed, or they just had more than expected. It could be either, or just
more than expected. Failure. It's like it was what we knew of, like where they had them. So it was 20% left of what we knew of, and then the reports that I was reading and the things that I was seeing was Iran was actually pulling more stuff out of storage and putting those into action. So that's I believe, to the best of my assumption, where that came from, right? From everything that I've read. But as far as the Strait of Hormuz being closed being like a strategic win for Iran, no, I don't believe it is. I mean, right now, presently, the United States is over there pulling mines out, right? Demining it and about to open up a new shipping lane. And what's Iran going to do about that? Right? As we talked before, Iran can always fire like a Shahed drone or something like that, hit one commercial vessel and all of a sudden it's a problem. But it depends on how much of the U.S. naval power actually gets put over there. And that's going to be, dependent on what the U.S. military actually assesses those current threats to be. Like, we do have the ability to do that if we actually want to focus on it. There's not a dang thing that Iran can do about it.
Why wasn't it done, though? Why wasn't it done when Trump
because we were focused on the war. Because we were focused on the war. And maybe we didn't want to put our ships in there because we hadn't reached that critical threshold to where they've got to be brought below before we're even willing to risk it, right? And I look at it as also, when I say the Strait of Hormuz closed, isn't necessarily like a geopolitical loss for the United States of America. We've talked about it before. China. 40% of Chinese oil comes from the Strait, right? It comes out of there. Like China is their number one big buyer. And, as I've laid out for you in the past and all of my viewers and everybody else, the bottom of the chopping block was Venezuela, then comes Iran, then comes, China and Russia. Because Trump has been embarrassed. There's no mistake about that. Trump's been embarrassed by the Ukraine war and trying to get his peace deals over there with Putin. And I can't believe he hasn't learned his lessons as he continues to do this with Iran, right? But what it really does is it puts a lot of strain on the Chinese economy. A lot of strain on the Chinese economy. You remember who it was that ended up calling Iran to actually get the strait to be opened a couple days ago to actually seal the deal? It was China. It was China. Yeah. So I think Trump doesn't care. Like we can watch our oil costs go up. We know as like the world's largest producer, like pulling out of ground of like oil, we know our sales are going to increase. And meanwhile, China's going to be hurt, and it's just one of those things that I think that, China has been pushing very hard against the United States of America. I don't think Trump would ever come out and state that either because it's dirty. Right. But I think he knows exactly what he was doing when he did that.
I'll give you a fact. We can always speculate, but these are facts on the ground. So just a few minutes, about an hour ago, actually, Israel canceled the big strikes they were planning on the southern part of Beirut. There was a big evacuation order given 2 days ago, and probably the biggest ever, if not the biggest in this war.
It was massive.
And that was canceled. So that was canceled because of the negotiations ongoing right now. The enriched uranium that me and you talked about the US potentially sending troops to take that out of the country or secure that. That's still around somewhere in Iran no one knows about. You got the Strait of Hormuz is still closed and controlled by Iran. And Iran has probably achieved a massive diplomatic win by meeting the vice president of the United States. I don't think this ever happened since the revolution. So if you put all these together, and that's a massive win for Iran because that legitimizes the Iranian regime being able to meet with the vice president in the eyes of many. So putting these together, at least where things are. So I spoke to, I can't remember who it is, the former commander of the CENTCOM, General McKinsey, and he said, Mario, I said, isn't it a strategic win? He's like, Mario, it's not over yet. Now, I wasn't sure whether he means like the war could continue or because the negotiations are ongoing. I think it's the latter. But if the status quo remains with the negotiations, let's say 6 months controlled by Iran of the Strait of Hormuz, the enriched uranium, Iran says they want to enrich it, but no one knows where the enriched uranium remains in Iran. Hezbollah remains as a proxy, is a military proxy, not only as a political party in Lebanon. So remains as it has been for years and decades. If those happen, would you then consider it a strategic win, or what do you need to see to call it a strategic win or loss?
Yeah, I mean, if Hezbollah ends up remaining, if Iran continues to fund those proxy terror organizations, if Iran actually does officially come out on this, controlling the Strait of Hormuz, that I would call a strategic loss for the United States of America. Right? Even if we got the uranium out of there, I still say that that's a huge strategic loss because then you shift from, you don't even have to worry about having nuclear weapons to keep everybody at bay. Houthis are again, threatening to shut down the Red Sea. And so when we look at that and you say, now we've got Iran that's in control of the Strait of Hormuz, and they've also via proxy have control over the Red Sea, two of like the most vital shipping lanes, in the world that they'd have. And that's a big problem. That's a lot of power for them to have. And I'll be honest, man, I don't even think the Saudis would be okay with that. I think the Saudis would lose it, if that ended up happening. I think the real, question
about the Saudis just now. We have timing. Saudi announces the arrival of Pakistani jets and military personnel to King Abdulaziz Air Base, Eastern Saudi, as part of the defensive agreement between the two countries just now, seconds ago.
That's wild.
So that's wild. A pretty interesting. What Pakistan is doing is fascinating. They're brokering peace with Iran, praising Iran, giving them the hero's welcome, and at the same time now showing their commitment to Saudi.
Well, they're trying to make a good face. Like what ended up coming out of here, and I think this was something like, politically speaking, that Trump probably offered Pakistan, and I think he just underestimated them. Honestly, I think he underestimated like the Pakistani resolve to continue to support Iran. Because immediately after all of this ended up coming out, you saw the Pakistani foreign minister and all sorts of people that like ended up jumping up and doing interviews and praising themselves as the one that brought America to the negotiating table, right? It was Pakistan that negotiated this. It was Pakistan that had America do this. And so they're using that as almost leverage to start like putting themselves out there because they've kind of been forgot about. They're over fighting the Taliban. They're dealing with India. They're dealing with all sorts of problems, right? Not to mention I think Pakistan has more foreign terror organizations like within its soil than any other, nation on earth. So they've got a lot of crap that they're dealing with. But yeah, I think that move of them going over there to the Saudis is exactly what I'm talking about. You know, like if there was ever a power struggle in the Middle East, I'd say it's between like the kingdom and Iran, you know, between those two, for who's going to, like, you know, kind of like run the region. And what Iran's been doing is doing it by proxy. So that's why I'm saying, like, I don't even think the Saudis are going to be okay with that. I mean, look at some of the final attacks that Iran ended up conducting, you know, on Saudi Arabia. They were going over for the oil pipelines, right? Like, they're trying to shut those down, because if you can shut down those oil pipelines, you make Saudi Arabia irrelevant. If Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz and the Houthis can control the access point to the Red Sea, but the Saudis still have a pipeline that the Houthis can't touch and that Iran can't touch, well, then they can be irrelevant. Saudi Arabia can just build a massive pipeline and say, look, throw your oil over here. It's going to be cheaper.
What do you make of the reports that the UAE struck Iran right after the ceasefire was signed? I find it hard to believe the MiGs, whatever, that were that Iran claimed fired on their island. I think there was more Iranian factions within the IRGC wanting to still, you know, cause harm in the Gulf even after the ceasefire was accepted, before following orders, because of their whole mosaic structure. And they fired at the Gulf nations. They had to justify it somehow, and that was their excuse. However, that was my initial thought. I still believe that, but I'm less confident now. Is there a possibility that the Gulf struck Iran just as the ceasefire was signed? And if so, with the Gulf as in Emirates in this case, and what do you make of Iran striking the Gulf right after as well? What does that say about the region?
Yeah, Iran fired hundreds of, of drones into Kuwait, you know, UAE, I think Qatar I saw in there. I think Saudi Arabia was another one that got hit. Yeah, I think Bahrain was like the only one really.
I don't know about Qatar. I think Bahrain. I think they left Oman and Qatar. I think Bahrain
really?
was struck, not Qatar. I think Bahrain. Yeah,
really?
Okay,
so maybe I have it backwards. But I mean, so many that I lost count. And then Iran came out and said, we didn't do any of that. You know, we didn't. Like, I don't know if you saw that statement by Iran, but Iran tried claiming that, no, they honored the ceasefire. They didn't fire anybody. No, I'm with you. I think the Emirates
except the strike on the UAE, they said it's because of the MiGs, the fighter jet, the Emirati fighter jet. I think it was an excuse. And then
but it was before that. But they struck the Emirates before that. And then you had the island getting struck, and then you had fighter jets that were over Tehran. And then you had like air defense systems that were activated over Tehran as well, like that same day, but no bombs were dropped, that I could tell. But it almost appeared as if there was a show of force going over top.
Going back to whether Iran won, I'm really interested to get your thoughts. If, again, one strategically, so it all depends on how the negotiations go. But going back to my question, because you were answering it before I interrupted you about Pakistan, if we keep seeing what we're seeing right now, Hezbollah. So what would be indicators to you that Iran won strategically? What would you need to see? Hezbollah remaining as is one?
Yeah. Hezbollah maintaining their influence over the Lebanese government, and Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran continuing to enrich uranium. If Iran continues to enrich uranium, like, make no mistake about it, I don't think so either. But even then, controlling the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, that is a huge strategic win. That is a massive win.
What if it's temporary? What if it's for like 3 to 6 months to get some reparations? Do you think that's fair and not a win?
No, still a win? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. Why would you have the international community pay reparations for something that the U.S. and Israel started? You know, that within itself is terrorism, and I don't think the U.S. should have the power to negotiate that either. And I don't think the international community would stand for it.
But the U.S. doesn't need to negotiate it. The U.S. could just let it happen, let the international community sort it. And what is the international community going to do? If the U.S. couldn't open the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's like, we're going to fucking do it. You have a problem with this, go to the U.S. because they caused the damage. The international community cannot militarily open Iran, and no one has appetite for a war with Iran. China's non-interventionist. They're allied with Iran. Russia doesn't really care. They're exporters. What is Europe going to do? Asia, what is Asia going to do?
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too, right? Like, as we look at it, like, what are you guys going to do about it? But here's the problem. Let's say even 3 to 6 months, you end up, making that happen. Look at what happened with the global oil prices right now. And then look when Iran opened it and started charging like the tariffs or tolls or whatever you want to call it to get those ships actually through the Strait of Hormuz. There was only like 6 vessels on average, I think, a day when it was open. I think the most that they got up in there was like 10 or 11 in a single day. But on average, they have like 130, 135 vessels that just freely sail through the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think Iran actually has the capability to do what they've been doing and get 130 plus vessels through the Strait, which means that those economical, fallouts from this are going to continue on for that entire time frame. And that's something I don't think the international community is going to be okay with. I think that within itself is going to cause China to intervene. Because like I said, the amount of oil that China, ends up getting through the Strait, I mean, it's just going to choke them off even harder. But at the same time,
what if they export the cargo ships using the petro yuan instead of the petrodollar as an example? that would
Mhm.
appease China and allow them to
Absolutely
still charge
not, because
toll?
they would lose so much in their economy, though. Like economically speaking, they would lose so much. I mean, you're talking about, delayed shipping. You're talking about, delays within their factories. You're talking, and on top of that, then you talk about like the monetary loss, their overall GDP for everything that they're exporting and selling, because they can no longer produce it because they don't have the ability to do so and move it around their country. That's a massive slowdown in the Chinese economy. And just having them, use the Chinese yuan, like it doesn't make up for it at all. Not at the rate of 10 ships a day. Absolutely not.
I'm just like, aren't you surprised by Iran's ability to keep firing missiles, keep the strait closed, keep firing drones, keep striking cluster munitions on Israel? They were able to do everything that people thought they wouldn't be able to do after a month. I just don't see how did they at least exceed expectations? Would you give them
No.
that?
For me, no. I think for the general population, yeah. It's nothing for me to understand that all Iran has to do is threaten to attack those vessels, and the insurance company goes and turn it off. Like it doesn't take Iran having a massive arsenal in order to make it happen. It takes one tanker being hit or two tankers being hit for the insurance companies to look at it and say, that's not okay. You guys can no longer sail through there. And from everything that I've seen in my life, like that's very, very reasonable. We've talked before about, like even like the U.S. bases during the global war on terror, where you have these massive bases that are set up with tons of aerial defense systems. And, over in Iraq, we'd have like homemade 57 millimeter rockets that are making their way through, that are being fired off angle iron. Those can still make it through. Mortar systems, things of that nature, have no problem making it through there. Not all of them, right? Some of them do. And all Iran needs is a lucky shot in order to shut it down. So that doesn't surprise me at all. And I think people that have like looked at this and said, that Iran shouldn't have been able to do that the U.S. is too mighty, they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, that's the sad truth of it.
What do you make of the reports as well that Iran and the U.S. are both rearming? We have reports that China is supplying Iran with shoulder-fired missiles, and then we have reports that a lot of American aircraft are flying as we speak to the Gulf ships. Let me get you the exact report here. There it is. It is all right. Ceasefire smoke screen. Flight radar trackers caused dozens of C-17s and C-5 shuttling between Gulf bases, Israel, Jordan, Saudi, and Kuwait right after the ceasefire dropped. We're talking C-17 cargo ships to Israel in a single day. Over 70 heavy transports in the first post-ceasefire window. This is resupply, not withdrawal. Munitions, equipment, Patriot systems, spare parts for aircraft that just through 6 weeks of combat ops. And we have the same thing with man pads being supplied by China or preparing to be supplied by China to Iran. So could we actually be seeing a rearmament between both countries?
Yeah, I mean, both countries are going to take this opportunity for rearmament. Why we're doing it, I think, is something totally different. I actually think that the downed F-15 pilot threw a wrench in our plans to go in and take the uranium out of Isfahan and Natanz. That's what I think. Because we kind of had, we were almost forced to show our hand in order to get that pilot back. Does that make sense? So if you look at where those aircraft landed south of Isfahan, it is a perfectly groomed 0.75 mile long, 1,220 meters. All right. Which just happens to be the minimum required takeoff distance for a C-130 under combat load. And it's perfectly groomed, hanging out in the middle of the desert out there. Right. That nobody even like suspected or knew it was there. We ended up using that location. And so it is possible that that was one of our spots, that we were planning on using for some reason for part of those operations. And that the way we went about conducting it could have been that the methods and means could have been the airfield itself, could have been a lot of different things that the U.S. did, to where now we've got to sit down, we've got to develop a new plan for how it is we're going to go there and do that. Because to me, like I said, I see it as virtually impossible that anybody in the administration advising the president or the president himself would actually think that Iran would be willing to meet all of our demands. I've said it before, it's not negotiations, they're demands. Like, let's be honest about it. The U.S. has demands. No uranium enrichment, ballistic missile program needs to be shut down and limited. And you got to stop funding foreign terror organizations. You got to stop funding, the Houthis. You got to stop funding Hezbollah. You got to stop funding the PMF, right? You got to take care of these things. Like, you got to stop doing that. And there's just no way in my mind that there's
a statement now that came in by the defense minister Katz and Netanyahu, literally as we speak, Netanyahu said the following: Israel under my leadership will continue to fight the terrorist regime of Iran and its proxies, in contrast to Erdogan, who aids them and even massacres his Kurdish citizens. That was Netanyahu. Defense Minister Israel Katz. Erdogan, who did not respond to missile launches from Iran towards his country and turned out to be a paper tiger. I don't know why they're poking Erdogan now out of nowhere. Is fleeing for the realm of anti-Semitism, fleeing for the realm of anti-Semitism and announces field trials in Turkey against Israel's political and military leadership. What an is that what he's doing?
I can tell you why they hate Erdogan. What do you think?
I know why they hate him. Now I don't know why that statement came out, because they said announces field trials in Turkey against Israel's political and military leadership. Is there some sort of legal action against some Israeli in Turkey or something along those lines? Some Israeli commander or something earlier today?
I don't think it has anything to do with that whatsoever. I mean, it very well could be, but that's small potatoes. Israel's pissed off at them working with Jolani down inside Syria, and like the amount of support and stuff that they've been giving there. They were the first ones to move in there. And I personally hate the fact, that Jolani is in charge of that country now. I also hate that, Turkey is working with him. I think that was probably one of the worst decisions by the president, but I also don't have the intelligence to know what it is that made him make that decision, in order to do that. I don't know what people were advising. I would have really loved to be a fly on the wall for that. They're making other poor decisions as well. Backing Viktor Orban, for example. I think that's a horrible decision, but that's on a different, front. But I mean, I think Israel is going to continue to do what they do. Did you read the New York Times article that they put out about the decision-making process?
So April, Erdogan, Turkey just escalated by having prosecutors indict 35 senior Israeli officials for crimes against humanity, genocide, over the 2025 interception of the Gaza-bound global Sumud aid flotilla. This is the latest step after the November 2025 arrest warrants, essentially announcing in absentia field trials in Turkish courts. So that's the response. The responses are for. So Erdogan is poking Israel as well. Obviously, it's part of a much bigger picture. But
it doesn't affect Israel at all, though. I mean, it's fine. Yeah. Like, throw out arrest warrants for him. Good luck, man. But yeah, I mean, Turkey's been very outspoken against the war in Gaza from the beginning. So it doesn't surprise me that they're going that route either.
Have you? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there was a ship in that Freedom Flotilla that actually had weapons and equipment on it. Like, you want to have a?
Really?
Yeah.
I haven't covered this.
Yeah, the one. Really? Yeah. Look into it. There's a ship that ended up turning around and going the other way before they ended up showing up. Yep.
I'll send you that. They know they're going to be intercepted, though. They know they're going to be intercepted.
Right. I'll send you the info offline.
What do you think? Okay, Matt. What do you think of the strikes that Israel did that day, 2 days ago? 500 people killed in 10 minutes.
Yeah. So here's what I heard. You ready? Here's what I heard. I heard
about
that
the coup attempt. Yeah.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that's what I heard. And so is it taking it too far? Well, that's a good question, because we just talked about the amount of Hezbollah, that's represented there within the government itself. And there's a reason that, the ceasefire, I'm trying to remember what they called it, like their overall plan for the November 24, but there's a reason that was never, successfully completed. And so I do think that there was very likely a credible threat that could have gone down. I really don't know, man.
I think it was like the timing of it. Suddenly there was going to be a Hezbollah coup on the day that the ceasefire was announced. It just sounds a lot more plausible for me that was a response of Netanyahu lashing out, knowing that he'll have to follow the ceasefire. As soon as I saw those strikes, I immediately told people, I'm like, look, I think the ceasefire is going to apply to Lebanon. I thought of that in the beginning. I didn't expect Netanyahu to do that. But I'm like, that shows Netanyahu lashing out. Whenever there's a war ending, you try to cause as much damage as possible to the other side before you have to end the war. And I think this is what he's doing. That makes a lot more sense to me. And I think he crossed the line. I think there was a certain rules of engagement that was happening in Lebanon, and that worked because that allowed people to turn against Hezbollah, and that was working really well. And when that happened, if anything, Israel would, if there was a coup attempt happening, Israel would let it happen. Why? Well, at least let it start so we have indication, and then maybe interfere, because then that would turn the entire country on Hezbollah. When Hezbollah was showing a show of force in Lebanon a few years ago, Lebanese people were furious. And I was just speaking to a Professor Bitar, who's very critical of Hezbollah, and he thinks they should go as a military arm, just like I think. And he said, Mario, there's a massive shift now, not massive, the Hezbollah was at an all-time low in Lebanon in terms of support after they dragged Lebanon into the latest war. But after the strike 2 days ago, we're seeing suddenly a shift again and people turning on Israel. Because when you see that, and when you see the statements by the defense minister, remember when the defense minister, I haven't asked you about it, when he said that people in the south of Lebanon, south of the Litani, cannot go back to their homes even after the war ends, 620,000 people. Even Conricus to me said to me, Mario, that's Alan Levy and Conricus, others said, Mario, that's like too far. Even we think that he's not really serious about it and that shouldn't happen. That's not feasible. But for me, statements like this, whether he means it or not, and I think it's just unfair to just dismiss something like that. Maybe you can, Trump said a lot worse things that he didn't mean, like wiping out a whole civilization. So you can say that. But something like this,
what the hell is wrong with people?
Can we start there? They turned the Lebanese people on Israel. I think it does a disservice to Israel.
Right. So yeah, like obviously him saying that, it does a huge disservice, right? Like it's not very good. But in greater context, he was saying until they can ensure that Hezbollah won't be able to return, right? So that they wipe out the Hezbollah infrastructure, meaning that they've got to take care of it because Hezbollah has miles upon miles of tunnels. They have massive weapons caches. They've got ballistic missiles that are built inside of houses. I can show you a Hezbollah video from the other day. I don't know if you saw it, where they came out busting the brick wall out, just to roll their ballistic missile launcher out, shoot it over at Israel. I think that got put out on Monday or Tuesday this week.
I think Matt, no one. Just I want to give you. I agree. No one should just say, "Oh, that's just a bullshit. That's just fake justification." Now it could be to a level, but Nasrallah was killed under a massive apartment building with maybe hundreds of people, hundreds of Lebanese citizens under multiple buildings. The leader of Hezbollah, knowing that he could be bombed by Israel, hid under buildings where there's citizens there. So if someone wants to argue that Hezbollah was not hiding under civilian populations, you can't make that argument when the leader, the most likely target by Israel, was hiding under apartment buildings. Now, first, it does not justify Israel leveling those buildings. I think this is, and I was speaking to someone who's very critical of the Israeli foreign policy. He said to me, Mario, under whatever prime minister in Israel, whatever number of years ago, I remember there was an investigation launched because one Hamas commander or leader, whatever, was killed with his family many, many years ago. Now it's like become the norm when you kill a leader of a group, Hezbollah, Iran, Hamas, and their families there or their citizens there. So I think the rules, the limit that they had of what collateral damage is okay that Israel had before versus now, that become a lot more relaxed, for lack of a better term. But just going back to your point, that the statement that he's made on south of Litani, not Lebanese people not being able to go back, that's a pretty extreme statement, though.
Yeah, that's a very extreme statement. So is wiping out a whole population. And so is, the threat that Hezbollah poses to Israel, right? Like that is very extreme as well. And, to address the targeting, that ended up taking place that same day, the ceasefire, the intelligence that they were able to get off of that and the way that they ended up conducting it, what I heard was that Hezbollah was holding a virtual meeting. And Israel had hacked into that virtual network and they were able to obtain the IP addresses, which is where they ended up getting them from. And so operations are also, driven by intelligence. And it could have been one of those because it's not like Israel gets to pick the time of that meeting either, right? It's when that meeting happens, that meeting happens. And so, yes, on one side, you can absolutely draw the inference that this could have been a huge show of force to piss off the international community for Israel to make a statement. But we all know Israel's not going to stop anyway, so that doesn't make sense. Looking at it from that perspective, from the intelligence driven aspect of it, where they had this one time that they know where all of these people are and they can actually conduct these strikes, that paints it in a completely different picture. I mean, if you're a decision maker and you're sitting there going, people like me, we all think that these ceasefire negotiations are going to fail. Let's say even if Lebanon was included, and this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to be able to take out that many leaders of Hezbollah. I would probably pull the trigger anyways and blow the entire, ceasefire if that was the case, which I don't think it is. I think it was just intel driven. And I don't think, Lebanon was included for all the reasons I've stated in the past, Hezbollah being within the Lebanese government, the Pakistani prime minister and his open support for the Iranian regime, and the Iranian foreign minister saying that the ceasefire had only applied to Iran, saying that, we will agree to do that if the ceasefire stops, if we stop getting bombed in Iran. I'd have to go look up his exact statement, but yeah, there was nothing else involved in it until afterwards.
So as a final question to you, Matt, where you said you weren't too optimistic about the negotiations, where do you think we'll be by the end of the year?
You want to know my honest assessment of what's going to happen? I think the U.S. is going to meet its objectives. I think eventually we're going to get the enriched uranium out of Isfahan and Tanz, wherever it is, wherever it's buried. We'll go in there, conduct some targeted raids. We'll be there for, no more than 72 hours on the ground, max. I would be surprised if it even went over 48. Get that stuff out of there, say we've completed our objectives and leave, and then Trump is basically going to turn a blind eye to whatever it is that Israel wants to do. I think Israel is going to try to launch a coup, personally. I think Israel is going to try to launch a coup.
Launch a coup, regime change in Iran.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Mossad's going to get cut loose after the U.S. is done.
Shit. Well, on this positive note, all right, brother.
You wanted my opinion. I'm going to give it to you, man. Yeah, I don't think Trump's going to stop him. All right, brother.
All right, man. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Matt.
Same. Thanks, Mark.
See you, brother. All right, man. All right, guys. Appreciate you coming on. It's a bit of a marathon today. There's Dimitri Laskaris will be coming on tomorrow instead of today. But I hope you enjoyed the interviews. We'll have the continued coverage of the negotiations. As I said earlier, the US and Iranian delegations are meeting in person right now. I think it's really important for Iran. It's a big win for Iran. That's the first time they meet someone that senior in the US administration. We had Israel cancel. So a lot of positive indicators. We had Israel cancel their strikes on Dahya, which is a pretty significant strike. So that's a really good sign. Too early to celebrate, but everything is pointing in the right direction. Obviously, there's the other side that there's a lot of resupply aircraft heading to American bases, as well as the China supplying military equipment to Iran. So these two reports are concerning, but that's expected. The US should keep their pressure on Iran, and at the same time, Iran needs to rebuild its military capability. So that could be the start of it, and also be prepped in case the negotiations fail. But at least all the indicators we're seeing right now, and I think JD Vance is pretty genuine about these negotiation attempts. I don't think he'll be comfortable tricking the Iranians. I think his mindset on all this is very different to that of the previous delegations of Witkoff and Kushner. But we'll see. I'm really optimistic. I've always been optimistic, and that's why I've been wrong so many times. But I've said before this war started, even before I announced the ceasefire, before the news came out, I said I expect the war to end soon. I got a lot of hate on it about it on X. Doubled down on it when Trump started making his crazy statements because it seemed pretty obvious to me he's off-ramping. That worked. And then right after the ceasefire and Netanyahu started striking Lebanon, I said, I think Lebanon, the war's about to wrap up. As soon as I saw Netanyahu escalate the strikes, and we're seeing that unfold as well. Now, the only question is, how will Lebanon look like? How will the entire region look like? In the short term, how will Lebanon look like? Will we see Hezbollah remain as it has been? That's very likely. Or could we see a massive shift in the country? Still possible, but I think less likely. And in terms of the region, that's up in the air. I think it depends a lot on what Mushtaba's foreign policy would be, the supreme leader of Iran, and how will the Gulf react to Americans, and what the Americans have done, what the Israelis have done. Will they double down on their alliance with the US, or could they start shifting and diversifying, like we saw the Pakistani fighter jets just landed in Saudi as a show of solidarity, and that's Saudi diversifying slightly away from the US with that alliance with Pakistan? Could we see other Gulf countries do the same? And could we see them get more aligned with Iran, which is my guess, or could we see them? Could we see that proxy battle between the Gulf and Iran, become more aggressive because of Iran's strikes on the region? We'll see. My bet is we'll see the countries potentially form a coalition to counter growing Israeli aggression. I think the sentiment that we had after the Israeli strike in Qatar, we'll go back to that same sentiment now. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again tomorrow for another live marathon. Thank you, everyone.